The sea is a dangerous mistress that covers over 70% of our planet. With ships evolving from wood to steel, we tend to be able to conquer it much more easily and explore it somewhat safer. However, the sea still overpowers our attempts at conquering, leaving many to disappear without a trace. And this story shares the same elements. However, her story stands out among the rest and is a case still talked about today. This is the case and disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder, all things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. And today we are talking about a very troubling and puzzling disappearance case. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this mysterious case together. Guys, Valentine's Day is coming up. Yes, it is. Another year, another Valentine's Day. Another holiday of not knowing what to get your beloved loved one. And if you're still doing the flowers and chocolates, that's fine. But let me tell you about a gift that has actually made my husband's jaw drop. And it's a Lola blanket, okay? Because the first time I touched one, I immediately understood the hype about it, and same as my husband. We now have curated about 8 of them. But it's the ultra soft luxury faux fur with a 4-way stretch that just wraps around you in the coziest way. And I have several different colors and patterns. I have so many to choose from. And this past Christmas, it was my #1 gift to give everyone, and everyone loved them. They cannot believe how soft they are. And for Valentine's Day, it's another perfect gift. Not to mention it elevates the entire living room because they look so nice and luxurious. And it also makes the perfect Valentine's gift because it's something you can use together. You can be cozy together, and that's nice. Unless you don't like that, then you can maybe get 2. Get one for yourself and then get one for him or her or whoever and just do your own thing. And unlike flowers and chocolate, they last for years. And they're also machine washable and they don't shed and they have no pilling. There's a reason it has over 20,000 5-star reviews. And right now you can get 40% off at lolablankets.com with code CCCM at checkout. That's 40% off at lolablankets.com using code CCCM. I can vouch for them. They are my favorite blankets. So check them out, and thank you so much to Lola Blankets for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. On May 12th, 1974, Amy Lynn Bradley was born in Petersburg, Virginia. And her mother, Iva Bradley, and her father, Ronald or Ron Bradley, were both insurance agents with Illinois Mutual Insurance Company. And her younger brother, Brad, would be born a couple years later. And the Bradley kids were raised in Chesterfield County, Virginia. And it would also be where Amy would graduate from L.C. Byrd High School. And she would receive a full scholarship in basketball and attend Longwood University, where later she would graduate with a degree in sports psychology in December of 1996. And growing up, their family had close bonds that made even childhood friends jealous, such as one of Amy's friends named Aaron Cullither. And according to Aaron, the dynamics around the house were full of laughter and close family bonds, so much so that she felt like a 5th member of the family. And Amy, of course, shared this fun, bubbly attitude that the rest of her family shared. And the only awkward feelings in the family were during college when Amy came out to her family as gay. However, the family still loved her and accepted her all the same. And Amy would also enjoy swimming and was known as a very strong swimmer, enough to actually get a job as a lifeguard. And she also worked a full-time job at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, where she would later reduce her hours in anticipation of starting a new job at a computer consulting firm. So she was gearing up to start her new life, and she just bought a new apartment and got a dog to fill the empty space in the Timbers, which was a complex off Robius Road in Chesterfield. However, a final send-off was in order, a timely trip to celebrate her new beginnings. And this trip was an all-expenses-paid family cruise aboard the Royal Caribbean International cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas. And the ship would leave from San Juan, taking them to the islands of Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin, and St. Thomas before returning and stopping in Puerto Rico. And according to some sources, the trip was won by Ron for his success in selling paid premiums up to $145,000. And he was one of 35 agents around the nation who won this vacation. The vacation was only paid for Ron and his wife. However, the organizers actually let them bring their children along. But unfortunately, they would all have to share the same cabin. So Amy was over the moon about this trip, shopping for bathing suits she was going to wear for the beaches. And she was initially nervous and hesitant about the trip, stating her fear of heights and being so high up and the open ocean, and who could blame her, honestly? The ocean's terrifying. However, she pushed through these emotions despite her fears, excited that her little brother Brad was visiting from college and would be joining along with the whole family. Because this family was very close and they loved to do stuff together. So finally, on March 21st, 1998, they would board the ship, the Rhapsody of the Seas. And this ship was massive, so it was fair that Amy had some fears of its height. Sitting at 915 feet long and 105 feet wide, and standing at around 12 decks tall, the ship towered over the sea. And with a capacity of around 2,400 guests and a crew of over 700, she was an absolute giant beast with a beautiful interior to explore. And before boarding, Amy bought a couple of postcards, and the Bradleys brought around a dozen rolls of film to document their trip. And Amy also had a use for it, and that was taking pictures to apply for a photo contest. So finally, with everybody packed up onto the ship, with horns blazing, they pulled away from the dock and headed to the open sea. And the mood was up and the cruise was set in motion. And days 1 and 2 were supposedly spent getting to know the cruise ship, enjoying the amenities and enjoying each other's company. And by day 3, March 23rd, was a stop in Aruba, where they rented a vehicle and took tons of pictures. And they had conversations with their family about what they were going to do the next day in Curacao once they arrived. And after finally returning to the boat as the sun began to set, they headed back to their rooms to change for the evening. And that night was a dinner and a formal night, where the family would enjoy a nice dinner and a late-night band named Blue Orchid. And the crew was very, very chummy with Amy, with the photographer even taking a picture with Amy and later with her brother, mistaking them for a couple. And according to Amy's family, the waitstaff was very attentive to Amy, so much so that they were making jokes about how if anybody needed anything, they should tell the staff that Amy needed something specifically. So after dinner, the family returned to their room and changed back into some normal clothing before heading to the pool deck for a night of activities, because there was a whole Dancing Under the Stars event with limbo and music and just good vibes. And at around 1 a.m., the parents decided to go back to the room and told Amy and Brad goodnight. And Amy and Brad just continued to party, listening to music and having drinks for a couple of more hours. So Brad would return to the room first at 3:35 a.m. And the ship's computerized door lock system recorded what time as well. And then it recorded Amy returning just 5 minutes later. So they both hung out on the balcony of their room, finishing their drinks and talking about the next day. And then according to their conversation, Amy stated that a man had actually made a physical pass at her, the bass player in the band named Alistair Yellow Douglas. But it wasn't a big deal to her, so after a few more minutes, Brad headed back into the room to get some sleep for the early day tomorrow. And Amy, feeling slightly sick, decided to spend some more time on the balcony to get some fresh air. So at around 5:30 a.m., her father Ron awoke and saw Brad asleep. And then he glanced out the window to see his daughter Amy's legs on the lounge chair on the balcony. So believing she was safe, he drifted back to sleep. So then at 6 a.m., Ron woke up again. And again, he looked outside, but this time, Amy was missing. And he noticed the door was cracked open about 12 to 14 inches, and her cigarettes were now gone. And her shirt was draped over a chair inside the room, so her father, looking at the obvious clues, thought she had changed her clothes and left the room to get coffee or take pictures as they were pulling into port. And Ron decided to get up and leave the room as well, to allow the rest of the family to continue to sleep. So then he would just naturally begin to kind of look around for Amy on the ship, thinking he'd spot her in a few minutes. But he couldn't. So Ron would hurry back to the room to wake up Iva, his wife, stating that he could not find Amy anywhere. So they both got up and left the room and headed to the front desk to get some help. So the family contacted the front desk and had Brent Hunter, the guest relations manager, notified. And at this point, the family was very concerned and forceful in their questions about what he could do for them. And one of these demands was a ship-wide voice page to inform everyone of their missing daughter. You know, bottom of the barrel type of thing you could do to look for someone that's missing. But the manager would explain that due to the time being 7 in the morning, they would not do that. And his reasoning was that it could be seen as intrusive to the rest of the guests. And he then said that he thinks they've had a good look around and should keep looking for around 30 minutes or more. And if they still couldn't find her, to return to him, where he would get the security officer. And Amy's family would beg them not to let anyone off of the boat, because if something did happen to Amy, she might potentially disappear under their noses. But the staff said the show must go on, and they could not do that. And in the Netflix documentary, Kirk Detweiler, the ship's cruise director, stated that just because a girl was missing doesn't mean he should stop 2,400 paying guests from getting off, which is horrible to even fathom, that one person's life isn't more important than 2,400 other people's brief comfort. So they weren't helping. And at 9 a.m., after she had been missing now for 3 hours, the ship crew finally did a large search. So they sent the family back to their room to wait until they had searched the entire ship. And after they did search every inch of the ship, the captain arrived at the room, informing the family that their daughter was nowhere to be seen. And the crew's beliefs were that she jumped over the railing or had fallen off the boat. With no evidence, by the way, that's just what they said. But concerned, the ship contacted the local authorities on Curacao. And one of those people was the chief of the island police, Atzir John Mentar. And he and his team stated it was the biggest search they had ever had, with helicopters and boats. So Marines, Navy, and the Curacao Coast Guard were all searching a large area near the area where she could have been if she had fallen off or had jumped off, just hoping that something would turn up. So they waited and assumed that eventually, if she had drowned, her body would wash on shore. Even sharks don't fully eat a body, and at the very least, they would find a piece of her clothing, a hand or a foot, just anything. But nothing turned up. And afterward, the cruise director gave the all-clear to continue to set sail, despite what had occurred, stating the show must go on in the documentary. It just completely paints him as a villain in all of this. Just a complete disregard for human life. And you definitely do not like him in this documentary, but of course he would be on the cruise ship's side to save face and keep that sweet paycheck going, because that's all that matters, right? Wrong. Because what many people forget is that the open sea is lawless. They're open waters without borders. So you are outside of the law, technically speaking. And the only semblance of security is the hired cruise-paid security team, which fearfully is going to look out for the cruise ship's best interest first and foremost, which is a huge conflict of interest on the waters. So a ship unwilling to stop everything and serve for a missing person with the mindset of keeping things running smoothly in the interest of money and saving face is just awful. So the fact that the cruise line decided not to make a ship-wide announcement until a majority of the people had already left the boat is widely considered to be the biggest mistake in her disappearance. And honestly, I completely agree. But finally, the FBI field office out of St. Thomas would be notified about the incident. And a woman by the name of Erin Sheridan, not to be confused with Amy's best friend, was notified of the situation very vaguely. And another member of the team, Victor McCullen, was also part of the task force. So March 26, 1998, 2 days after Amy's disappearance, the FBI team flew from St. Thomas to St. Martin. But the problem at St. Martin is that the cruise ship do not dock on the island, and the only way onto the ship is to be brought by a dinghy. So the dinghies picked up the FBI team and drove them over to the boat. And once they had landed on the ship and spoken to the captain, he informed them of the basics of what was going on, stating that Amy had disappeared from the balcony. So they made their way to the room that the Bradley slept in. However, the biggest problem they noticed was that the room was not locked down as a potential crime scene. Instead, the room had been cleaned. Are you kidding me? So any evidence that could have been left behind was completely gone, since the staff decided to clean the room like nothing had happened. So fingerprints, fibers from the sheets, and any DNA that could have been available were wiped up and vacuumed, or thrown out. So the only evidence left behind were her shoes neatly put together on the balcony. And the FBI did notice that the railing to the ship was quite high, and for a 5'6" woman would still be noticeably tall. But unfortunately now the ship has gone through many makeovers, so this photo is not the actual room of the time or railing, but it is very close. So the only questionable piece of evidence that she could have jumped from the balcony would be from the table pushed close against the railing's glass. However, the FBI linked that due to the cleaning staff moving things around instead of direct evidence of her actually jumping over the railing. So more questions were left than answered, and the FBI needed to speak to the family to get more information. So the FBI first interviewed the family as a whole, and then split them up individually to see if they could draw out any clues or potential suspects. However, after interviews, nothing really stuck, and the family was not on the suspect list for Amy's disappearance. But the FBI weren't just looking for suspects, they were looking to eliminate any possibilities that were unlikely to make this case easier to solve. And the only thing they knew for certain was that Amy entered her room at 3:40 a.m. and was seen by Ron Bradley at 5:30 a.m. and was gone at 6 a.m. So the next step was to talk to anyone else who could have seen Amy that night. And she was partying on the deck, so someone else had to have seen her that evening. And if she had left the room between 5:30 and 6 a.m., someone must have seen her. And one passenger by the name of Wayne Brittig, a door down from the Bradleys, was questioned. And Ivor Bradley mentioned that she had seen him on his balcony next to them frequently, leaning over the railing to speak to Amy. And he would talk to her about her schooling and finishing college, just things about her. And they told the FBI that he would go on these cruises himself, never taking anyone with him. And in the Netflix documentary specifically, they do kind of paint him as someone who was very suspicious. And I don't really personally think it was him. I think he was just a lonely guy being nice and talking to strangers, as a lot of people did in the 90s when we weren't looking at our phones, but I don't know. Watch it for yourself. But another man would speak up by the name of Chris Fenwick, who was another passenger on the ship. And he had heard gossip around the passengers about a woman going missing, jumping from the boat, either accidental or by her own accord. However, it wasn't until he saw a notice taped to his door labeled Amy Bradley Missing. So immediately he recognized the girl, and Chris was a video editor working for a computer company in the San Francisco Bay Area, and his job was to edit an almost best of or highlight reel of the fun everyone had on the cruise ship. So recognizing her face, he goes back through the footage his cameraman recorded and finds her dancing the night away. But she's dancing with someone else, a man that Amy had mentioned to her brother, the bass player known as Yellow. So he had footage of this exact man that Amy had mentioned to her brother, dancing that night at the party. And according to his claim, he would later get a phone call from the head of security on the ship, asking him for the master footage. And shocked, he answered strictly with a no. No one gets his master footage, ever. And instead, he made a small copy and sent it directly to the FBI. Because why the ship would want that master footage is odd. Seems a little fishy. Sorry about that pun. I didn't mean to make a pun. But anyway, that is the word of mouth from a single man. So another passenger saw the flyer, a woman by the name of Lori Thompson. And according to her, there weren't many young people on the boat, especially at the party she recognized Amy from. So Amy stood out to her. And at the time, Lori was only 18, so hearing Amy's success with her apartment and finishing college intrigued her, and after the night of fun, she and her friend decided to go back to their room. However, they weren't tired, so instead, they went to the top of the deck to hang out between 5 and 6 a.m. And Lori stated that she saw Amy and a staff member together in the glass elevator, and she could see clearly, due to the glass, that it was two people she recognized, Amy and the bass player, Yellow. And after about 10 to 15 minutes, she saw Yellow walk right past them, not a glance or a word. And she found that odd, since during the time at the nightclub, he was way chattier with them. So Douglas was seemingly a suspect, but unfortunately, being in international waters, you can't detain anyone. So the FBI got an interview with him and even a polygraph test, and he admitted to knowing who she was and flirting with her, but her disappearance? He wouldn't say. And as the cruise was coming to an end, the FBI was going to lose out on all elements of the crime scene. People, rooms, etc. And on the 6th day of the cruise and 4 days into Amy being missing, they finally docked at St. Thomas. And one of the family's close friends told them to not wait until they docked in Puerto Rico, but to go back home. So finally, after landing, they were greeted by their friends and family, and Iva's mother was there, and she began to sob uncontrollably. Naturally, their family was in despair. And after around 24 days of Amy's disappearance, the father and son returned to Curacao for a press conference. And the father, Ron, began to tell the story about what Amy was doing that night, what she was wearing, and how intoxicated she was the night of the party. And eventually, they had actually raised a reward for $260,000, with more and more being raised as the days went by. And her brother continually asked that if someone has her, to please just let her go. No questions asked. They just wanted her returned home safely. And Iva, her mother, was destroyed. So she stayed home, manning the phones, and tip lines and hotlines, contacting embassies, the media, anyone and everyone who could help. So as the news was being spread around, with phone numbers and Amy's face plastered on newspapers and posters in Curacao, and as Ron and his son walked out of the press conference lobby, a man approached them. And this man stated he recognized that woman, holding a flyer in his hand of Amy. All right, let's take a moment to talk about glasses for a second. Because before my family and myself now found Warby Parker, it was genuinely not a great experience. Because you walk into one of those stores, everything's overpriced, the styles all look like something my dad would have worn in 1987, and you're just standing there squinting at yourself in a tiny little minuscule mirror hoping for the best. Well, Warby Parker, on the other hand, has completely changed the game for members of my family and now myself. Something really cool that they have is the virtual try-on. And it's where you just point your phone camera at your face and you see exactly how dozens of frames look on you in real time. So there's no guessing and no buyer's remorse. And the quality is incredible. And their prescription glasses start at just $95. And they've also got contacts and sunglasses and even online eye exams. So everything is all in one place. And our listeners get 15% off plus free shipping when you buy 2 or more pairs at warbyparker.com/CCCM. So that's 15% off 2 or more pairs at warbyparker.com/CCCM. Thank you so much to Warby Parker for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. So this man was named Deshi, and he was a taxi driver. And he asked Ron Bradley if he was the woman's father. And agreeing, he apparently told Ron that despite what everyone was saying, she did not jump, and she did not fall, and she was not pushed off of the boat. She was there, on the island, and he had seen her. And according to the man, she had approached his taxi acting frantic, and he would tell Ron that she was wearing a white top with jeans, staring at him with her bright green eyes. And she asked him where she could use a phone, to which he pointed toward the direction of some that she could use. And instead of walking towards them, she went the other way. And according to the Netflix documentary, he also told them places to look, those including the Coral Cliffs, a resort, and Kadushi Cliffs. But he warned them, however, that when you go there, do not speak to anyone, and instead just observe your surroundings. So with this news, they met up with someone named Adzir John Mentor. The man I spoke about previously, the man that talked to Amy from his balcony to her balcony, had heard the man's story and was moved. And knowing the Bradleys were not familiar with the island, he joined them on their journey. Especially with the areas they were going to, they may get attacked. And it was not a shock that the areas they were going to be dangerous, with close proximity to Venezuela. And it comes as no surprise that there is drug trafficking, prostitution, and even sex trafficking. And the areas were beachfronts, so things could be moved from land to sea quickly and be gone without a trace, similar to Amy Lynn Bradley. So after looking around town for a while and the boost of confidence from the taxi driver, they returned home and contacted America's Most Wanted. So 6 months into her disappearance in August of 1998, a man decided to go on a diving trip in Curacao. And this man went by the name of David Carmichael. And he was in Porto Marie, a place that was popular with locals more than travelers visiting, at least at the time, according to Carmichael. So it'd be very rare to actually visit this part of Curacao by accident, at least rare to visit for someone who isn't diving. And he knew the reefs were large and beautiful, and the water was still warm at this diving depth. So it was the perfect place for a dive with plenty of wildlife to explore. So after a day of diving, he and his team surfaced and returned to the beach. And there they began to wash their equipment. But coming down the beach, Carmichael looked up and saw a group of 3 people walking towards him. And these 3 people were a man, a woman, and another man who looked like a local from the island. And upon closer inspection, he noticed a tattoo of a Tasmanian devil, the cartoonish one specifically. The actual tattoo is actually Dizzy Devil, which is a younger purple Tasmanian devil from the Warner Brothers cartoon. So as he's standing there, the woman with the tattoo begins to approach him, almost as if she's going to say something. But before she can approach, the man with her cuts in front of her and then stares Carmichael down. And he says without that stare down, he wouldn't have thought anything of it that day. And there wasn't a word from him, just this really mean stare down before the man ushered the mystery woman away to the beach bar. And after, he was slightly confused and thought something was off, but paid no attention to it other than some strange beachgoers. And Carmichael states that he only recognized Amy after seeing her photo on America's Most Wanted. But unfortunately, after realizing who he had seen, months had passed, and it was already December. And he would later state that he is, quote-unquote, haunted by that encounter with Amy. And I know it was her. And also, that wasn't the only fact that he recognized. He recognized that the man who took the alleged Amy away, also shown on the show, Alistair Yellow Douglas, the bass player. And he called and told the FBI his story and what he could remember and all the details, stating that with 100% certainty, that was Amy he was on the beach with that day. And later on, a man named Bill Hefner, full title U.S. Navy Petty Officer William Hefner, claimed to have encountered a woman claiming to be Amy Bradley. So the first time someone had a longer conversation with her. And Hefner, aboard the USS Chandler, stated that his ship had docked in Curacao, supposedly just for the night. And to get a feel of the town and have some fun, Hefner went deep into the island to a brothel he wasn't supposed to be in. And the place had a hotel above, and at the front was supposedly a man with a snub-nosed .38 on his belt. And walking in, he watched 2 guys and 2 girls come from upstairs, with the men armed with guns. And the men split from the women and approached the bar, and Hefner decides to sit with these girls. And one girl was Hispanic, but the other was a white, petite, tattooed girl. So sitting there, the Hispanic girl stood up and walked towards the bar. And immediately the white woman turned to him, stating that she is being held against her will. And she allegedly told him she owed $200 and can't get her freedom unless she pays. And Hefner had heard hundreds of these stories before because he was almost 18 years into his service. And in Singapore and Thailand, he had heard it all. But she would tell him her name in a southern accent, Amy Bradley. And she told him she left on her own and got off the cruise ship to get drugs, but now she's trapped in this place with those men, the men with guns. However, her story was cut short as the other woman returned to the table, showing that she did not want anyone else to hear. So after he quickly got up and left, stating that because of the guns in the establishment, he didn't want to cause any trouble. And he would later read a magazine and would inform the Bradley family that he recognized the woman in the picture. However, he would inform them years later in 2002. So it's extremely unfortunate that he didn't say anything sooner or report it. Because apparently with his military career and being a couple years from retirement, he could have lost his rank or worse, be kicked out. So he was too afraid to speak up about it. And the FBI took him in and interviewed him, showing him pictures of Yellow Douglas, but he didn't recognize him. And they even put him on a lie detector test, which means nothing nowadays, but it wasn't shown that he was lying. And he had valid conviction that it was indeed Amy Bradley that he saw and spoke to. And he had no reason to lie and no reason for the reward if they didn't find her, so there was nothing to really gain. However, things weren't really adding up, because why would Amy want to score a drug deal and then owe people money? It just seemed unlikely, but it was not out of the question for the family. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that this guy, Yellow, the bass player, would tell her that he could get her drugs on the island and then she could have been kidnapped on the island. I don't see how that isn't a valid theory. But another story, not mentioned in the Netflix documentary specifically, happened in San Francisco, California, And the woman was watching a street musician with two men nearby in April of 2003. And allegedly, she walked up and confronted the woman, stating she recognized her. And immediately, the two men seized the Bradley-looking woman and fled the scene. And supposedly, the woman gave a pleading look while being taken away. And later, after informing the FBI, they would provide sketches matching the descriptions of the alleged man for the general public to help spot. And this seems very far-fetched, but the FBI sketched the men regardless and added them to the database. However, the big reveal of what I think is the most important portion of the story and the most likely outcome was what happened after this. So in 2005, the Bradleys would open their email and open an attachment with a series of photos. And among these photos was someone scantily dressed. It was a woman lying on a bed. And upon closer inspection, and to their horror, the woman looked oddly familiar. And these photos supposedly came from a website used for tourists to meet for free sex or engage with prostitutes. And the woman in the photo looked eerily like their daughter, Amy. And the photos were of this woman clearly posed and uncomfortable looking in minimal clothing. So the family naturally was horrified. And the FBI would do forensic analysis on this photo and came to the conclusion that it was highly likely that this was Amy Bradley. And their family stated that this was something she would never do unless it was against her will. And that photo made it seem like the case. Because Amy, as we know, liked women, and these websites were made with men in mind. So with this horrifying knowledge, they went on Dr. Phil with the evidence to spread the news to anyone who would possibly watch the video. And in the episode, Dr. Phil shares the photo of supposedly Amy Bradley from this website, and he showed some of the photos provided and compared them to others, specifying that cheekbones, ears, and chin shapes don't change dramatically enough throughout your lifetime. So with that knowledge, you could compare two different photographs to see if they were the same person. But sadly, it almost seemed like she was positioned in a way to hide the areas where she had tattoos, because these identifying markers would open the prostitution operation in half. So it makes sense if this were Amy, they would position her in that way. So after this episode aired, a woman claimed that she remembered the face of the missing woman from a trip just a few months before the air showed. So in March of 2005 in Bridgetown, Barbados, Judy Marr claims she saw a woman whom she believed to be Amy Bradley. And she was on a cruise just as Amy Bradley was with her family. However, one of her stops was in Barbados. And she was out shopping with her husband, exploring the town, hoping to bring back some souvenirs for her family back home. And after exploring a shop, she told her husband that she didn't really want anything, so he suggested they head back to the ship. But first, she wanted to use the restroom. So not even 3 or 4 minutes passed before she hears men at the door talking, speaking to someone and saying, "The deal's at 11 o'clock, and I'm warning you, you better be ready to go." And she thought maybe a drug deal, possibly, but something definitely illegal. And he also stated that she better be all set to go and don't try to leave or do anything because we're going to be outside waiting and watching all night. And the woman then asked, quote, "Could we stop and see the children?" Unquote. And then all of a sudden, the men left the restroom. Outside the stall was a woman still in the bathroom with long, dark hair that was a bit messy, or quote-unquote crazy. And she looked disturbed, almost like she was crying. So walking over to the sink, Marr began washing her hands and saying hello to her. And she asked if she was also on vacation, but the woman shook her head and said no. And she asked if she lived there, and this time, there was no response. So she asked what her name was, and she told her, Amy, with a southern accent. So Marr kept giving her small talk, talking about how she actually had a daughter with the same name as her. But then the woman, seemingly Amy, got in her face, backing her into a wall. So Marr, realizing that she didn't want to talk anymore, said she hoped she has a good day, and she shuffled out of the door. However, behind the door, a man blocked her exit, and she inched past him, telling him to excuse her before returning to her husband. And this whole time, the woman, potentially Amy, did not move, with her back to the exit, completely motionless, seemingly scared. And after returning, he made a comment saying that she had been gone a while, and Marr tells her husband that there's something going on with a woman in there, and that there is a man forcing her to do something she clearly doesn't want to do. But for some reason, they do nothing about it and head back to the cruise ship and get food. However, that memory stuck, a country accent woman named Amy. And it wasn't until the Dr. Phil show aired that she called the FBI, and without any doubt in her mind, the woman from the photo was the girl she saw in the bathroom that day. And the FBI would investigate this claim and visit Barbados. However, the store had no cameras and no one recognized the story. But this begs the question, did Amy have children now? And is that why she mentioned something about children to the man in the bathroom? Well, no one knows. And they would hit a dead end yet again. But the FBI would make sketches of the descriptions from Moorer to help anyone else who spotted them. And this would be a common theme with a lot of stories. And over the years, the family would receive hundreds of tips, some credible and many not. However, some would be downright evil and cruel. And the biggest and probably the most awful story was a supposedly promising lead that led to a brick wall and just more problems. The Bradley family was familiar with troll emails because they would receive fake tips frequently, with people constantly harassing them with fake coordinates of where she was last seen, that she was never going to be found, or even ones as brutal as they'd murdered her with a hatchet. Just horrible, evil human beings. But the most horrifying email they received was from someone named Frank Jones. And this was very early into her disappearance. Mind you, all the way back in the fall of 1999. And the man claimed to be a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer with a team of ex-Army Rangers and ex-Navy SEALs. And he and his team claimed that Amy was in danger and they had seen her held hostage in a heavily armed Colombian housing complex that was surrounded in barbed wire, like something straight out of a movie. And the team gave an accurate description of Amy's tattoos and even the lullaby that Ivy used to sing to her down to the line. And this tip came from a cook named Judith Margaritha, who claimed to know exactly where she was. So with this knowledge, they had no doubt in their minds that he was telling the truth. But unfortunately, these US Navy Army people weren't going to stick their necks out on the line to gun some kidnappers down to save the day unless they brought in some inside help. So the Bradleys informed the FBI on the tip, but the team just couldn't wait. So after months of back and forth and hoping the FBI would respond and find something, Frank Jones said they were out of time, and if they wanted to attempt a rescue, they would need money stat. So at the time, the reward money from the Bradleys had reached over $200,000, thanks to the National Missing Children's Organization and lots of donors. And they sent this money to Frank to attempt the mission. But unfortunately, the Bradleys did not receive a call back from Frank because Frank Jones was a scammer and he had stole that over $200,000 from the Bradleys during a time in which they were just trying to find their daughter, just a purely evil human being. And it wasn't until February of 2002 that federal prosecutors would charge him in defrauding the Bradleys of over $24,000 of their own money and $186,416 from the National Missing Children's Organization. But with many credible sightings spanning years, the disappearance began to form a picture, one that is very disturbing. And several theories would emerge, each with its own evidence and its own problems. Let's take a moment, a little break, if you will, to talk about something I adore, and that is my kitty cats. And although I love my cats, they have been absolutely unhinged this winter, because the moment I wake up, I hear them meowing constantly, and that's because they love their food, and because they know it's Smalls. Thank you to Smalls for sponsoring this video. But if you're still feeding your cat mystery kibble with ingredients you can't pronounce, it's 2026. We can do better. Because Smalls makes protein-packed cat food with real preservative-free ingredients you'd actually find in your own fridge. And Cats.com named them their best overall cat food. And honestly, my cats would agree. Because I have actually noticed with a short-hair cat and a long-hair cat that their coats are way softer and way nicer. Not to mention their breath actually has a tolerable smell now. And getting started with Smalls is super easy. You just share some info about your cat and they put together a personalized sampler. And 88% of cat owners reported health improvements after switching. So make 2026 your cat's healthiest year yet. And get 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/CCCM. That's 60% off plus free shipping at smalls.com/cccm. Thank you so much to Smalls for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. One theory is accidental death or falling overboard. The evidence of the room showed a table pressed up against the railing, and although the railing was high, she had a bit to drink, and with her intoxication, she could have fallen off the railing. And also, Ron, her father, last saw her at 5:30 a.m., then at 6 a.m., she vanished. And the last place he saw her was on the balcony, then gone. And lots of people think this is the outcome, but no one reported hearing or seeing her fall, making the scenario improbable at most. Especially since the distance to the shore was not far, especially for an experienced swimmer. So this is seen as the most likely, but I don't personally believe this to be the case. Especially since the cruise ship immediately believes this is the only possibility. That makes me extremely suspicious. And also, if it wasn't an accident or by her own hand, no evidence points to her wanting to jump off anything. And I think the worst thing people point to is the jawbone found in 2010 on the beaches of Aruba, and it was thought to belong to another woman by the name of Natalie Holloway, who had also gone missing, but it didn't belong to her according to testing, and no DNA testing was done to connect her to Bradley, but it most likely belonged to a Caucasian woman. But that is a stretch beyond a stretch. But another belief or possibility was foul play on the ship. Because could someone have wanted her gone? And one belief was that she was smuggled off of the ship, maybe through a suitcase, and she was tiny enough to fit in a bag, but she wouldn't have gone willingly. So could she have been drugged? And some people believe this goes way further than just Douglas, but the entire staff on the cruise ship. And I did state that you are technically on a floating island. You may be a resident of the United States, but the president of the boat is the captain, and he makes the final rules, which is terrifying. Won't be catching me on a f***ing cruise ship in my entire life. So could the ship and crew have been associated with a criminal gang? They were very chummy with Amy the entire night, only a couple days into the trip, which is odd. And this was to the point where she actually felt a bit uncomfortable. But at minimum, we know the ship and crew is going to take the side of the billion-dollar corporation. And the first people a cruise ship calls when something goes wrong are their lawyers, not the police or feds to come and help them. So I feel like this would be the way to get someone off of the boat, especially since someone dragging a suitcase off a boat would seem suspicious. And if this is the case, it falls into the next theory, which is human trafficking. Because Amy was an attractive young woman who was fresh out of university. She was a prime target for human traffickers, especially someone so far away from home. A fact Iva stated in the documentary was that before she disappeared in Aruba, the staff wanted to take Amy off the ship to go to a place called Carlos and Charlie's. And creepily enough, this bar was a place where another woman, Natalie Holloway, which I can absolutely cover also, went missing in 2005. And that is a whole other story, and honestly, I will cover that story as well. But to happen at the exact place where she was invited by herself is suspicious. And the saddest piece of evidence, as well as the eyewitness accounts, was the pictures of this mysterious woman from the Dr. Phil show. Because the FBI even says that most likely these photos could be photos of Amy. And they saw her in the basic locations from which she disappeared, and they allegedly heard her name from her directly. It's just a weird coincidence if there are other Amys at these places with a country accent. And lastly, the photos that look remarkably similar to her, because I feel like of all these theories, this is the most likely. Because lots of people go missing in these areas for these exact reasons. And the island is outside of jurisdiction, and since most people don't know the island very well, it's easy to smuggle people out, which is horrifying to think about. Not to mention, if she actually had children now, she would probably be less likely to leave them behind. This theory, I personally think, is the most plausible, but let me know what you guys think down below. And some people also think that if she is still alive and out there, they believe that she might be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. And this would explain why, after so many years, if she is still alive, she doesn't want to come home. Or again, if she has children, she wouldn't want to leave them. Because maybe they have threatened to hurt the children if she leaves, or just, it's all heartbreaking. But at the end of the day, every theory is devastating and we are still left with an open case. And a woman is still missing. And the official case is open. However, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead on March 24th, 2010. And this would be 12 years after she had disappeared with no witnesses and no body found. However, with the Netflix documentary being released in 2025, lots of talks, websites, and forums have begun to pop up again, talking about her. And the case is still being investigated again all over the world, with people interested in her story. And I think the Netflix documentary helped her get her name back out there to the next generation of curious people. And at the very least, her family is still looking and open to any information to this day. So if you have any information, please contact the FBI. And one man by the name of Anthony Willis in 2018 created a website for all information about Amy to be posted to called amybradleyismissing.com. And an interesting development happened with this website that they found out as well. And according to Willis, he could scrub through all the IP addresses of people who visited the site, so they decided to weaponize it. And the Bradley family would post pictures of Amy's dog, old photos, new photos, and more, all in the hope of catching the attention of whoever was going to the website. And in their findings on holidays such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Iva's birthday, they found IP addresses popping up in Barbados and Curacao, and all across that area. And even weirder, someone was staring at the web pages for up to 45 minutes at a time. And this led them to believe that either someone who had kidnapped Amy was watching to see if they'd get caught, or, the other reason, Amy was still alive and wasn't coming home. But the family is still looking, hoping for a small tidbit of information to come out. And something as small as a single clue would help turn over rocks to find Amy. And her brother went on YouTube livestream Q&A days after the Netflix documentary came out in 2025, answering any questions and hoping for any more information people could provide, just raising awareness about his sister who is still missing. And he still posts frequently on X, formerly Twitter, on his account, constantly talking and thinking about his sister Amy. And on the website, amybradleyismissing.com, there is a $25,000 reward that leads to any information about her to this day. And according to the Netflix documentary, new information had come out about Amy. And in April of 2017, 19 years after Amy disappeared, a message was left at the Bradley household phone. The message was from Amica Douglas, the daughter of Alistair Yellow Douglas, the bass player who we're very suspicious about. And Amica was born in St. George's, Grenada, and she was a daddy's girl who was taken to lots of fun places growing up by her dad, like beaches, his bands on cruise ships, etc. And Amica states that her mother divorced him when she was 2, and the reasoning she would tell her was that he did something on a cruise ship he was on. Suspicious. Something unforgivable, and she should do her own research. But the story goes from her memory that after Yellow had been gone for a while at work on the cruise ship, he came home different, almost cold. He was upset and saying rude things to her, and he apparently returned home with a suitcase full of pictures of women, and it was all Caucasian women. And when she got older and brought up the question about Amy, his reactions were weird, getting upset that she would bring it up. And in the documentary, Alistair Yellow confirms he took pictures and had pictures, but it was with everyone. Yes, there was Caucasian women, but he danced with everyone, took pictures with everyone. But Amica cries and thinks there's something missing in his stories. And the FBI had questioned Alistair Yellow Douglas, and voluntarily he took a polygraph test. And the FBI released him and didn't charge him with the disappearance of Amy, as there was no evidence to hold against him. And sadly enough too, all the way back in 1999, the Bradleys sued Royal Caribbean. However, the lawsuit was dismissed as they stated they acted accordingly and appropriately to the situation. You, Royal Caribbean, you will never get my business. But Amy's family will keep looking, and they have not stopped. And they're so hopeful that they still have her car in their garage, shined and primed for when she returns. It just breaks your heart. And I really think talking about these cases constantly and bringing them to light breathes a chance that someone might see it and recognize something. And the most popular Reddit thread on her disappearance is still being discussed within days, weeks, and months. So people are still interested in her case, including myself. So there's always that hope for their families that they'll return home. And hopefully that's the case for Amy Lynn Bradley. But that is the end of the case of Amy Lynn Bradley. Again, if you have any sort of information or tip, please contact the FBI and let me know what other cases you would like me to deep dive into, and I will see your beautiful face in the next one, okay? Stay safe. Bye. On a cold February evening in 2008, a young realtor in Victoria, British Columbia prepared for what could have been the biggest sale of her life. The clients were mysterious, wealthy newcomers to the city eager to buy a $1 million house. They found her through a recommendation she couldn't trace, spoken in an accent she wasn't sure was real, and insisted on meeting immediately. And by the next day, Lindsay Buziak would be dead. And 17 years later, their faces are still unknown. And what happened inside that house wasn't just a killing, it was an execution. And someone out there planned it to perfection. This is the story of Lindsay Buziak. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. And today we're getting into kind of a more personal case. Honestly, I was around and alive and knowing what was going on during this case, and it was close to home, and it bothers me that it is still a cold case. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this cold case together. Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak was born on November 2nd, 1983 in Victoria, British Columbia. She was the first daughter of Jeff Buziak, a local real estate agent, and Evelyn Reitmayer, a stay-at-home mom. And in 1986, Lindsay became a big sister when her sibling Sarah was born. And though her parents' marriage ended in the mid-1990s, the divorce did not fracture Lindsay's family bonds, because she would remain close to both her mother and her father as she grew up, luckily. So as a child, Lindsay split time between Victoria and the peaceful summers at Lake Cowichan, where the family kept a trailer at an RV lot. And those summers were filled with laughter and play, and Lindsay's younger sister, Sarah, fondly remembers learning to swim just to keep up with her energetic big sister. And from an early age, Lindsay's personality just sparkled. And she was often described as a happy, outgoing little girl, quote, full of joy, unquote, as her mother recalls. And there was a fashionable flair about her even in childhood. One story even recounts how young Lindsay once begged for grape-flavored bubblegum simply because it matched her purple outfit, which is absolutely adorable. And her mother would gently refuse, saying she would buy what Lindsay needed, not just what she wanted. But ever resourceful, Lindsay took that as motivation. And by her early teens, she landed her very first job at Sirens, which was a trendy clothing store in Victoria's Mall. And Lindsay was determined to earn the things she wanted. Just a hint at the ambition that would later define her. So Lindsay grew up in the greater Victoria area and attended local schools, including Royal Oak Middle School and Reynolds Secondary School in her teen years. And in school, she became known for an infectious smile and a warmth that just drew others in. She was just an overall amazing person. And friends and teachers remember Lindsay's genuine ability to make people feel valued. She, quote, could make friends with everybody, unquote. And that's what her father, Jeff, later said about her. Yet Lindsay wasn't just friendly. She had a compassionate streak and a strong sense of right and wrong. And her mother tells of an instance when Lindsay witnessed a boy being bullied at school, where Lindsay immediately stood up for him, stepping in to stop the teasing, saying, quote, I was really proud because that's the way you're supposed to be. And Evelyn would say that about her daughter's bravery. So Lindsay's nurturing, people-oriented personality came with a protective side. And she held firm anti-drug values and chose her inner circle very carefully. In fact, in one of her later relationships, one thing she proudly told her family was that he didn't do drugs, which was a key point for Lindsay, who stayed away from substance use and just frowned on that lifestyle overall. So just an extremely mature young lady. So she was a young woman who was both ambitious and compassionate in equal measure. And she had big dreams for her future, but never lost sight of kindness along the way. And she was not afraid of a little hard work either. Because having started employment so young, Lindsay developed a very strong work ethic really early on. So she balanced school with work and just proved to be very, very driven. And this would be a trait that would later serve her well when she decided to follow in her father's footsteps into real estate. So by her early 20s, Lindsay's ambitions crystallized into a career goal. She wanted to be a successful real estate agent in Victoria. So she would enroll in the University of British Columbia's Sauder School of Business Real Estate program and studied hard to pass the licensing exam. And in June of 2006, at just the age of 22 years old, Lindsay achieved that goal. And she would pass her estate exam. And at the time, she was one of only 20 real estate agents in the entire Greater Victoria region under the age of 25. So it was clear that Lindsay was just a rising star in an industry typically dominated by older, more experienced agents. But she would hit the ground running. And Lindsay's first job in the field was with a small brokerage called Maverick, where she spent about a year and a half marketing new townhouses in Victoria's West Shore area. And being eager to advance, she next took an opportunity at Remax Camison. And being one of Victoria's top agencies, and notably the same office where Jason Zalo's family worked. And we'll talk about Jason's relevance to the story in a bit. So joining Remax brought Lindsay under the wing of the high-performing Zilo real estate clan, and Lindsay didn't miss a beat. And during about a year-long period, Lindsay managed to close 8 property transactions totaling about $3.2 million in value. So it was a strong start for a 24-year-old new agent. And colleagues commented that Lindsay seemed just destined for success in real estate because she was sharp and driven and personable. All things you need to be a great real estate agent. My dad's a real estate agent, so I would know. But to say the least, she was absolutely kicking ass in the industry. And she was just exactly the kind of agent clients trusted. And a former coworker later noted that Lindsay was determined to become successful in her career as a licensed real estate agent, and she worked tirelessly toward that goal. And in that short amount of time, she had built a very promising reputation in Victoria's property market. And it was around the same time her real estate career was taking off that Lindsay's love life took a significant turn. And in late 2005, while attending a real estate networking event and training workshop, 22-year-old Lindsay crossed paths with 25-year-old Jason Zalo. And now she already knew of Jason from around town because he came from a very prominent, wealthy local family deeply involved in real estate. And Jason's mother, Shirley, was a successful realtor also. And the family owned investment properties as well. So they were just kind of known in that industry. And Jason himself had been a competitive hockey player in his youth and now worked as a mortgage broker and realtor. So in Lindsay's eyes, the Zalo family were real estate royalty in Victoria, and she was impressed. Quote, she really looked up to the fact that Jason was in the real estate industry and his mom was too, unquote, said Lindsay's friend Vicky, saying that Lindsay seemed to be excited to be welcomed into the Zalo's world. And by mid-2006, Lindsay and Jason began dating seriously. And their relationship moved quickly, and soon they were living together. And the Zalos provided the couple with a 1-bedroom condominium in Victoria's Inner Harbor area, which the family owned. And that area, I've been there a bunch of times. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful area. And quite expensive. And they also spent summers at a lavish lakefront vacation home Shirley Zalo had purchased on Shawnigan Lake, where Lindsay and Jason enjoyed the amenities, and even had a private basement suite. So from the outside, Lindsay seemed to have it all. A supportive boyfriend from a well-off family, and a budding career. I know we all love researching or listening to all things true crime, but what I love more, and I'm sure you do too if you have them, your fur babies, your pets, your doggos. And I love my 5 dogs very much. Kevin, Debbie, Petey, Frankie, and Rupert. And I want them to be around as long as possible. So I want them to be healthy, and I want to make sure that they're not eating processed kibble. And that's where Ollie changed everything for me. Because if your dog could talk, they'd beg for Ollie, trust me. You got the full body tail wag, the excited little hops, the big goofy grin. That's the Ollie effect, okay? Because Ollie delivers clean, fresh nutrition in 5 drool-worthy flavors. Honestly, I've debated eating it at some points. But even for the pickiest eaters, which I got a few of those in my little dog kingdom. And it's also made in US kitchens with the highest quality human grade ingredients, and Ollie's food contains no fillers, no preservatives, just real food, which is incredibly important to me. I don't feed my dogs anything I wouldn't put into my own mouth. That's the one I go by. And here's the thing, healthier food means a happier pup. More energy, shinier coats, better poops. Who doesn't want a better poop, you know? And more excitement at mealtime. And with 5 protein-packed recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes or fresh turkey with blueberries, even the pickiest eaters can't resist. And getting started is super simple. You just take their 30-second quiz about your pup and they'll create a customized meal plan. So you don't even have to think about it. And your welcome kit comes with 2 weeks of meals, a free storage container, and a guide to transition your dog to their new diet, because that is extremely important as well. And what really sets Ollie apart is that they're the only fresh dog food that comes with unlimited routine health screenings. From diet and digestion to dental health, you get direct access to experts to keep your pup on track, which again, super important to me. I care about my dogs extremely deeply and I want them to be as healthy as possible. But it's like having a detective on the case of your dog's health, and 90% of pet parents saw positive changes within 30 days. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. So head to ollie.com/CCCM and tell them all about your dog. And you can use code CCCM to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. 60% off. They're just giving it away, basically, and you better take advantage of it because it is awesome. And plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. So that's ollie.com/CCCM and enter code CCCM to get 60% off your first box. Thank you to Ollie for supporting this channel and sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. As 2007 drew a close, Lindsay confided to those closest to her that things with Jason were not as perfect as they appeared. And during a visit to see her father in Calgary on December 5th, 2007, Lindsay admitted she was unhappy in the relationship. And she told her dad that Jason didn't share the same drive or quote-unquote ambition she had, and that was causing friction. And it was during this time, Lindsay even hinted at possibly ending the relationship. And she would repeat similar sentiments to her friends back home, telling them she wasn't fully satisfied with Jason and was considering breaking up.
She just said, "Daddy, I made a mistake. I feel horrible about it." But she said, "I can't do it anymore."
And Jason, when later asked, said he was aware that they had some troubles in the late 2007, but claimed they never discussed breaking up and that he believed the relationship wasn't in danger of ending. And interestingly, not everyone saw the cracks. Lindsay's sister Sarah thought the couple seemed happy together and noted that Jason, quote, treated her well, unquote, in her experience. And there's, I don't know, treating someone well, and then there's someone just not having any ambition or drive. You know, you're not an evil person if you're not driven, but, you know, if like personalities don't match, then it doesn't match. You can look a certain way on the outside or appear a certain way, but that doesn't mean that you're good. So I think it's just kind of an odd thing to say. So in early January 2008, Lindsay and Jason went on a trip to Whistler with Jason's family, a vacation Lindsay hoped would rekindle their closeness. And by all appearances, it appeared to work. And Lindsay came back from the Whistler getaway optimistic that she and Jason had turned a corner, saying, quote, "We had such fun. This was the perfect thing. We needed to spend more time together," unquote. And she would tell this to her mother, just sounding overall upbeat about their future. So by all accounts, heading into February 2008, Lindsay was trying to make the best of their relationship. And she and Jason were still living together and, for the moment, putting on a united front. But unfortunately, Lindsay would never get the chance to decide what she truly wanted next, because her life was about to be cut short in a way as shocking as it was brutal. So late January 2008, Lindsay received a phone call that would change her life. An unfamiliar woman's voice spoke on the other end of Lindsay's cell phone, and the caller had a thick foreign accent, which Lindsay would later say she couldn't quite describe, maybe Spanish or Mexican, though she wasn't sure. Though something about it struck Lindsay as possibly fake. And the woman would introduce herself, though Lindsay would not recall the name and notably did not write it down, and got straight to the point. And she said her husband was being transferred to Victoria for work and they needed to buy a house immediately. And not just any house, a $1 million property, newly built, move-in ready, with a separate suite for a housekeeper. So extremely specific and extremely quick, and just all around extremely odd. So the timeline was urgent. The woman claimed they wanted to purchase within a few days, which is insane in the real estate world. I mean, my dad's a real estate. That's crazy. That is like next level crazy, even in this time. So this unsolicited inquiry was both exciting and obviously unsettling for Lindsay, because as a relatively new realtor with no 7-figure listings of her own, a potential $1 million sale was a huge opportunity, the kind that would kickstart her career and yield a hefty commission. But something about the call just didn't sit right, and Lindsay couldn't shake a sense of unease. Because for one, the client's supposed referral made no sense. And when Lindsay asked how she'd gotten her personal cell number, the woman vaguely replied that a friend of her husband's had recommended Lindsay. And after the call, Lindsay diligently checked with all her recent clients and contacts, but none had any idea who this mystery woman could be. So it appeared the referral story was a lie, which is a massive red flag, and there were other red flags. One being the accent. The woman was like deliberately disguising her voice with this fake accent, and the unusual urgency and specifics of the request as well. And Lindsay confided in her father and boyfriend about the strange call, and she told her dad outright that she had a weird feeling about these new clients. And Lindsay referred to the unknown couple as, quote unquote, the Mexicans, referencing the accent, when discussing the situation with friends. So to keep track of the inquiry, Lindsay saved the caller's phone number in her contacts under the label, quote unquote, $1 million. And it was just a defining feature of these clients, a $1 million budget. But the name also hints at Lindsay's skepticism. This potential deal seemed almost too good to be true, as she remarked to her boyfriend Jason. And Lindsay's instincts would be spot on, but she just didn't know it yet. So the clients insisted on meeting soon, and they set an appointment for the next evening, Saturday, February 2nd, 2008, at 5:30 p.m. to view properties. And with a mix of eagerness and dread, Lindsay agreed to show them a few homes. But she privately expressed that something about this just didn't feel right. And court documents later confirmed what Lindsay feared, because the people behind that phone were setting a trap. I want to take a break from today's video to thank today's sponsor, a brand that supports this channel, and that brand is Surfshark. Surfshark VPN, to be exact. And honestly, I've been using it for months now, and it's become essential for how I create content and stay safe online. And let me show you why Surfshark is different. First off, and this blew my mind, one subscription covers unlimited devices. I'm talking your phone, laptop, smart TV, and even your gaming console. Everything all at once. No more choosing which device gets protection, which is awesome. And here's what I love most. Surfshark now covers 100 countries. They're literally the only VPN to reach this milestone, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. So when I'm traveling for content or just need to access different Netflix libraries for research, I can connect anywhere. And speaking of Netflix, Surfshark unlocks 15 major country libraries, including the US and Japan. Some of the best shows are in the US and Japan, just saying. And it's just a game changer for finding content inspiration. But it's not just about entertainment at the end of the day, because with their strict no logs policy and RAM-only servers, your data literally disappears the moment you disconnect, which is incredibly important to me now that I've actually educated myself on how all that works. It's really scary. So this feels good. Plus, their 24/7 live support has saved me multiple times when I needed help abroad, when I was still figuring the whole thing out. And here's the thing, you can try it completely risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. So make sure to check out Surfshark and go to surfshark.com/KallMeKris, that's KallMeKris, and use code KallMeKris at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN completely free. And I'll make sure to put the link in the description and pin a comment down below. But seriously, surfshark.com/KallMeKris, use code KallMeKris and get those 4 extra months and protect all your devices, because you deserve protection and you deserve to watch whatever the heck you want. And thank you also for choosing to watch this video. And thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. So on Friday, February 1st, the day before the showing, Lindsay hustled to prepare for her big clients. So she spent the day selecting suitable homes in the upscale Gordon Head neighborhood of Saanich that fit the couple's criteria for a home, which was new construction, vacant, around $1 million. And one property was recent build on a small cul-de-sac, and that was 1702 De Sosa Place. And this house was listed at $964,000 and was brand new and unoccupied, a perfect candidate for a home. And it had been built by a developer named Joe D'Souza, a friend and business associate of none other than Shirley Zalo, Jason's mother. And Lindsay herself had never listed this property. Another agent in her office had it, but as a realtor, she could show any MLS listing and still earn commission. So the quiet street had only 4 houses on it, arranged around a short dead-end lane that intersected a main road. So the scene was set for very private viewing, which, as we'll see soon, was by design. But there was no busy traffic, and 2 of the 4 homes on the cul-de-sac were still under construction. In other words, few potential witnesses around. And that evening, Shirley Zalo decided to stop by the condo where Lindsay and Jason lived. And Shirley arrived around 7:15 p.m., supposedly just as a casual visit to see her son and his girlfriend. And as she entered the unit, Shirley happened to catch Lindsay in the middle of a phone conversation. And it was the mystery woman calling back to finalize the next day's plans. And for about 10 minutes or so, Shirley overheard bits of Lindsay's side of the discussion before Lindsay hung up. And Lindsay then revealed the details to Shirley, which was that the clients were confirmed for a 5:30 p.m. showing on Saturday at 1702 De Sousa Place. So everything was arranged. And Shirley later said that she immediately felt concerned. Sensing Lindsay's slight discomfort, Shirley repeatedly offered to go to the showing in Lindsay's place, essentially volunteering to meet the clients herself. And it's not clear if Shirley's worry was driven by Lindsay's safety or simply wanting to help her attend other plans. Because Lindsay had mentioned possibly heading to Vancouver for a friend's bachelorette party after the showing. But either way, she was trying to help. She was offering her help. But Lindsay declined the help, and she insisted she would handle it. After all, this was her client and her commission on the line. However, the fact that Shirley Zalo knew exactly when and where Lindsay was meeting the unknown clients, and even the content of their phone call, would later become one of many troubling footnotes in this case. And some would question whether it was mere coincidence that the house chosen for the showing was built by Shirley's acquaintance, or that Shirley happened to be present during the planning. But on February 1st, 2008, those connections were not yet the subject of suspicion, just hindsight. And by nightfall, all was set. And at the condo, Jason returned home from a hockey game around midnight, and he and Lindsay talked about her nerves. And Jason at this point was just trying to reassure her, and even made the same offer as his mother did. And he suggested he go and meet the clients for her, or at least accompany her, so that Lindsay could leave early for her trip to the mainland after the showing. But Lindsay just shrugged it off. So she was feeling uneasy, but also just curious. Because why had she been chosen by this caller? Because she had so little experience at this point. It just wasn't adding up. And again, I mean, we look at this case with all the red flags there, but hindsight's 2020. I mean, you just don't know at this point. You don't assume that people are going to hurt you. So still, Lindsay told Jason she would do it and that he didn't need to interfere. And if she was concerned, she surely would accept help. At least that's what Jason thought. So when she declined his help, he assumed she felt confident enough to proceed. And they went to bed, perhaps both a little on edge, but hopeful that by the next evening, Lindsay might be closing the deal of her life. So February 2nd, 2008 began normally for Lindsay Buziak, albeit with jitters. That morning, the mysterious client actually called the landline at the condo and reached Jason, because Lindsay was out at the time. And Jason told the caller Lindsay wasn't home and offered to give her Lindsay's cell phone number. But the woman coolly said she already had it. And Jason noted that the caller's accent sounded like, quote-unquote, broken Spanish, just confirming the same voice Lindsay had heard on the phone as well. And this brief exchange was the last contact before the ill-fated meeting. So as afternoon approached, Lindsay grew increasingly anxious. And around 2 p.m., she went into her RE/MAX Camison office on Chatterton Way And there she pulled aside two receptionists and asked them to search the names and the phone numbers of these clients, because they had given her numbers and names, and they should be in the real estate database if they had bought anything in Victoria specifically. So Lindsay just basically wanted to see if these people had any history of buying or selling in Victoria, just to know that these people exist or have done business here. But nothing came up. It was as if they didn't exist. So Lindsay was visibly uneasy at this point, quote unquote, freaked out, according to the colleague who overheard her talking about the situation. And sensing her discomfort, a few coworkers, including one named Cal, offered to accompany her to the 5:30 showing. But Lindsay, again, declined the offer, reassuring them that it was okay because her boyfriend Jason would be there for backup. Quote, she had full confidence her boyfriend was going to be there, unquote, Cal would recall. So Lindsay may have been spooked, but she had a safety plan, and that was that Jason would meet her right after the clients arrived, just to be sure everything was fine, so at least there's that. So at around 3 p.m., Lindsay left the office and met up with Jason for a late lunch downtown. And they chose a restaurant by the Inner Harbor and finished around 4:24 p.m. And that was the time that was actually stamped on their paid bill later. And over lunch, Lindsay was distracted. She ate quickly and went over the property feature sheets she had prepared, showing Jason the list of homes she planned to take the couple to, including 1702 D'Souza Place. And Jason, just sensing her nerves, once again offered to do the showing for her. But again, Lindsay said no, perhaps trying to prove to herself she could handle such a big client despite the odd circumstances. And by 5 p.m., with dusk falling on a cloudy winter evening, the couple split up to get ready for their respective plans. And Lindsay headed back to their condo to change clothes, wanting to look professional for her high-end clients. And Jason, meanwhile, drove to a nearby auto detailing shop called SHC Auto Graphics to briefly meet a colleague and pick up a friend, Cohen Oatman. And Cohen was both a friend and an employee of Jason's, and they played on the same men's recreational hockey team. And the two had gone to a hockey game scheduled for later that night, after Lindsay's showing. And they intended to go together once Jason checked on Lindsay. So while Jason was in the meeting at the auto shop, his friend Cohen began calling his phone repeatedly, eager to link up. And by about 5:30 p.m., Cohen arrived at the shop and hopped into Jason's Range Rover. And Jason explained to Cohen that he had gotten a call from Lindsay earlier asking him to meet her at the house because she was uneasy about the situation. And according to what Lindsay had texted Jason, she provided the address 1702 D'Souza Place and essentially asked him to, quote unquote, follow her there. So Jason would tell Cohen that a quick detour was needed, and they would swing by the house just to check that Lindsay was okay, and then head out to their hockey game after. So Cohen would agree without hesitation. And at roughly 5:35 p.m., Lindsay pulled up to the cul-de-sac on D'Souza Place. And the street, as we know, was newly built and so recent that it didn't even appear on Jason's SUV GPS map. So as Lindsay parked and stepped out, her phone rang and it was Jason, and he was lost in the maze of Gordon Head's residential streets calling for directions. So Lindsay began to guide him over the phone. But before she could finish, she saw something that made her cut the call short, saying, quote, "Oh, I've got to go. They're here," unquote, she told Jason abruptly, because the new clients had arrived. And Lindsay would hang up with Jason still on the line and would turn to greet a couple approaching the driveway. And multiple witnesses later provided remarkably consistent descriptions of the pair Lindsay met at approximately 5:30 p.m. So the couple appeared to have come on foot, walking up to the cul-de-sac, not driving, which is very odd. And the witnesses watched as Lindsay, ever professional, stepped forward with a warm smile and shook hands with the couple at the front steps. And Lindsay did not seem to recognize them personally, and her greeting was courteous but obviously formal. And the neighbors later remarked it looked like the first meeting between agent and clients, nothing indicating that they were friends at all. And that's when Lindsay would lead the man and woman through the front door of the house and close the door behind them. And unbeknownst to Lindsay, she had just sealed herself inside an empty home with a pair of killers. So inside 1702 D'Souza Place, the air must have been chilly, because the home was vacant and the early February evening was beginning to become dark. And Lindsay's cell phone records show that at 5:29 p.m., just before the couple arrived, she accessed the lockbox to retrieve the house key. And the lockbox timestamp was later noted by investigators. So now, at around 5:30 something, she began the routine of showing the property. And we can only really imagine her initial nervousness gave way to her professional training. And she likely pointed out features of the entryway and main floor, trying to build rapport with the clients. And on the surface, nothing appeared amiss during those first few minutes. And outside, Jason and Cohen were just minutes away. Having just gotten off the phone with Lindsay abruptly, Jason still didn't have the precise directions. And he would actually call his younger brother for navigational help. And he would start driving to the neighborhood with that help. Meanwhile, Lindsay did manage to send Jason a quick text with step-by-step directions to find D'Souza Place, and this would be the last message she would ever send. So at about 5:38 p.m., Jason texted back to say, quote, "I'm a couple minutes away," unquote, letting Lindsay know he'd be there shortly. But that text would never be opened. And shortly thereafter, the quote-unquote showing moved upstairs. And the home's main bedroom was on the second floor at the top of the staircase. Perhaps Lindsay led the couple up, chatting about the layout, and walked ahead of them into the master bedroom to show off its ensuite bathroom. But it was at that moment, around 5:40 to 5:41 p.m., that the trap was sprung. And as Lindsay turned her back, one of the pair attacked her swiftly from behind. And it was at that point that Lindsay would be stabbed with a knife or knives, just in a frenzy. And Lindsay would have virtually no time to react or defend herself. But the attack would be vicious and personal. The whole scene was just the definition of overkill. And early news reports would sensationalize that Lindsay was stabbed, quote, more than 40 times, unquote, but police have since debunked that exact number as an exaggeration. But she did suffer multiple wounds concentrated in her chest and abdomen, along with numerous cuts and nicks. But it just indicated a very frenzied assault. And it all happened extremely fast because she had no defensive wounds at all on her arms or hands, which is it's not normal in these sort of circumstances unless it's completely just out of nowhere. It just implies she had absolutely no chance to fight back or even raise her hands to protect herself. And it means that the first stabs likely just incapacitated her almost immediately. And in the midst of this attack, an eerie and crucial event occurred, and Lindsay's phone, still in her jacket pocket, accidentally dialed a number. And at 5:41 p.m., as Lindsay was being attacked, her BlackBerry made an outbound call, a pocket dial, to a friend she wasn't in frequent contact with. And the friend received a muffled voicemail that captured distant noises from inside the house, and the sounds of movement, and perhaps one of Lindsay's last words or gasps or a distant thud. The message itself was unintelligible, but clearly not a normal call. And later, Saanich Detective Sergeant Chris Horsley would confirm this pocket-dialed voicemail as likely occurring, quote-unquote, at the point of attack. The whole thing is incredibly horrible and sad, but I mean, to have just like a recording of it is, I can't even imagine what that would be like I just think about the families at this point, and it's just like, I just can't imagine. But basically, it was an inadvertent cry for help that went unheard in time. And at around 5:45 p.m., Lindsay was almost deceased, and she would be laying in the master bedroom of that home. So the unknown man and woman had executed their sick, disgusting plan. But at that same moment, headlights swept into D'Souza Place, and Jason and Cohen arrived at the address. Later than expected, but finally there. And as they pulled up in front of 1702, Jason saw something odd through the decorative glass of the front door, and he glimpsed a shadowy figure moving in the entrance foyer, and then a person quickly receding from view deeper into the house as the Range Rover's headlights illuminated the front window. So it looked like someone was peeking out and then retreated. And Jason assumed this was just part of the showing, that maybe Lindsay and the clients were walking around inside, and just not wanting to interrupt or seem like an overly nosy boyfriend, he decided not to barge in. And Lindsay had allegedly asked for him not to interfere with the showing by making his presence known. And instead, Jason chose to park down the street for a few minutes to give the showing a little bit more time. And he told Cohen that it looked like the appointment was still going on, so they should just wait. So Jason would drive a short distance away, then circle back a couple of minutes later. And by now, it was close to 5:55 to 6 p.m., and he parked in front of the house again. But no sign of anyone was through the windows now. And that's when Jason sent a text to Lindsay's phone saying, "Are you okay?" But there was no response. And he tried then calling her cell, but then there was no answer. And now Jason started to worry. But he naturally assumed maybe they were just talking inside. Maybe she was still doing the showing and maybe it was just going really well and that they had more questions. But obviously, as we know, that wasn't the case. And 10 more minutes passed in silence. And the house from the outside looked dark and very still. And at around 6:05 p.m., approximately 20 minutes after the first arrival, Jason's concern reached a tipping point. Because Lindsay still had not replied or emerged, and Jason decided to take action. So pulling up the driveway with Cohen, he got out and went straight to the front door of 1702 D'Souza. And to his alarm, it was locked. So he repeatedly knocked and rang the doorbell, but it yielded no answers. So Jason would peer through the frosted glass insert and saw a very disturbing sight, and that was Lindsay's shoes that were laying in the entryway inside. So she clearly had taken them off upon entering, which meant she was likely still inside. But why wasn't she coming to the door? Was she hurt? Did something happen? So with a surge of panic, Jason pulled out his phone and dialed 911. So it was now 6:05 p.m. when he told the emergency operator that he was at a house where his girlfriend was showing a home and he couldn't get in, and he was worried that something may have happened to her. And he emphasized that he had come to check on her because she had, quote, been kind of scared about this showing. And as he was on the phone, Cohen was searching the perimeter of the house for another way in. And he found a gate to the backyard, but it was secured. But Cohen managed to spot something important, because through the fence slats, he could see that the back patio's French doors were wide open. So he waved to Jason and pointed urgently. And the killers, it turns out, had fled through those back doors moments earlier, escaping into the night. And in their haste, they left the doors gaping open behind them, and likely slipped through a gap in the backyard fence out to that main road. So seeing that open door, Jason hung up with 911 mid-call after providing the address and sprang into action. And he ran to boost Cohen over the backyard fence, and Cohen dropped into the yard and dashed through the open French doors into the house. And he immediately unlocked the front door from the inside, allowing Jason to rush in behind him. And the two men split up in the foyer, and Cohen took the main floor and Jason took the second. And as Jason was running up the staircase, he was yelling, "Lindsay, Lindsay," into the silence. And as he neared the top of the stairs, a nightmare materialized. And he could see Lindsay's body slumped onto the floor in the master bedroom. And he also saw blood. And Lindsay would be found lying on her back, collapsed against the wall. And Jason just dropped to his knees at her side, frantically trying to rouse her. And Cohen, horrified, immediately called 911 again at 6:11 p.m., urgently telling the dispatcher that they needed an ambulance right away. And Jason, in a state of shock, began attempting CPR on Lindsay, even though it was far too late. So he tilted her head and started mouth-to-mouth breaths, and in a chilling, incredibly chilling detail. And within minutes, the sirens of the first responders pierced the quiet neighborhood, and paramedics arrived and police cars swarmed the cul-de-sac. But despite resuscitation attempts by EMTs, Lindsay Buziak was pronounced dead at the scene. And Jason was just in hysterics and, I imagine, complete disbelief. And he kept trying to will time backwards, saying, quote, "If I was 10 minutes earlier, if I went with her, would she still be alive?" I just can't even imagine. I can't even imagine the thought process after witnessing that. I feel so incredibly horrible for him. But no one had seen this mysterious couple leave. They were like ghosts who vanished before anyone realized what had happened. And the only physical evidence left behind were a bloody footprints inside the house, and a trail on the stairs indicating the path the killers took as they calmly walked out of the front entry, only to retreat and escape out the back when Jason's arrival spooked them. So it appeared the murderers were literally in the process of walking out the door when Jason and Cohen pulled up, forcing them to flee via Plan B over the back fence. So if Jason had arrived just a minute or two earlier, he may have come face to face with them. Not that that would have changed Lindsay's fate, but maybe we would know who they are now. But I think thinking what ifs in this situation is just not helpful at all in any sense, because you can't change the past. So in a matter of minutes, a bright, beloved young woman's life had been brutally snuffed out. And the reverberations of this carefully planned homicide were only just beginning to be felt. And as the crime scene tape went up around 1702 D'Souza Place on that cold February night, the investigation into Lindsay Buziak's murder was launched. And this was an investigation that would grow into one of the most perplexing and high-profile unsolved cases in Canadian crime history. So Saanich police quickly secured the D'Souza Place property as a crime scene, but from the outset, investigators faced a major challenge. And that was that the scene had been compromised by the frantic rescue effort. And in their desperation to find and help Lindsay, Jason and Cohen had necessarily trampled through the house, inadvertently contaminating evidence, which, I mean, you can't blame them. I mean, they were trying to look for her and then trying to help save her. Like, I just feel so bad. But within hours, the Saanich Police Department's major crime unit took charge of the case. And they realized they were dealing with anything but an ordinary murder. And forensic examiners scored the empty house late into the night and the following days. But they would find no usable DNA or fingerprints from the perpetrators. And they assumed that the assailants had likely worn gloves and perhaps protective clothing or shoe covers that they took with them. So this was clearly an extremely calculated murder. And the murder weapon, presumed to be a sharp-edged knife, was not found at the scene either. And the only clue was the bloody shoe prints tracked along the floor. But even these were limited, and the specific shoe brand or size was not released publicly, suggesting it might not have even been distinctive enough to trace conclusively. And the absence of defensive wounds on Lindsay and the sheer ferocity of the told investigators that this was a targeted execution, not a robbery gone wrong. And how would it even be a robbery? This was a vacant home. So the only conclusion could be that this was a calculated attack. A murder in the first degree. And outside the house, potential witness information was minimal, because neighbors only saw the well-dressed couple arriving, not leaving. And no one recalled hearing screams or loud noises, implying Lindsay may have been attacked so suddenly that she couldn't even cry out for help. And that's assuming people were in close enough proximity to hear screams anyway. But investigators were intrigued by the victim's last known communications, because the pocket dial voicemail Lindsay's phone made during the attack was recovered, but yielded little beyond muffled background noise. And the final text message from Jason to Lindsay was, "Are you okay?" And it remained unread on her phone. The police also quickly traced the cell phone that had lured Lindsay, and it was, as suspected, a burner phone registered under a bogus name, which was Paulo Rodriguez, and a fake business address in Vancouver. And records showed it had been purchased 3 months earlier in Vancouver and activated just the day before the murder. And it made calls exclusively to Lindsay and was powered off permanently soon after she was killed. So authorities believed that the phone was used only for planning and executing this crime, then disposed of. Just a hallmark of organized, premeditated murder. And it even pinged off a cell phone tower near the murder house the night before, suggesting the suspects did a dry run or surveillance of the area in advance. It's just sickening, horrifying, chilling, sickening. It's all just a nightmare to think about. So the forensic and physical evidence thus painted a grim picture. And that is that this homicide was carefully organized and executed by individuals who knew exactly what they were doing, likely had done it many times before, because the degree of planning just indicated an experienced hand. Using an untraceable phone, choosing an empty house, a new build, and minimizing forensic traces. Yet, paradoxically, the overkill violence was very emotional and amateurish in its frenzy. So you have this very calculated, planned murder, and then the murder itself felt like a rabid attack of emotion. Like it wasn't thought of, it just happened out of nowhere. It just didn't fit the profile of a dispassionate professional hit. So this contradiction just puzzled police, because the murder had both highly professional elements and intensely personal ferocity. So within the first day, police had to consider a difficult reality. The two suspects seen by witnesses had essentially vanished into thin air at this point, and they left virtually no trace of their identities inside the house, and no one saw a getaway vehicle. So the only thing known was how they looked, and that one had possibly a fake accent. So the composite sketch of the female suspect was developed from witness descriptions and released to the public a year later in 2009. And it depicted a Caucasian woman in her mid-30s with short, stylish blonde hair and a calm expression. And alongside, police described the male suspect as Caucasian, about 6 foot, with dark hair, wearing a brown jacket. And the woman's dress was also highlighted, a black, white, and red patterned dress that was very distinctive. And for investigators, it was as if the suspects had worn a mask and then disappeared into a crowd, though. And they had to start considering who could have orchestrated such a plot and why Lindsay was the target. So the Saanich police threw themselves fully into the hunt for Lindsay's killers. And the department was not large, and a murder of this complexity was a major undertaking. And at least 5 full-time investigators were assigned to the case. And they conducted exhaustive interviews with everyone in Lindsay's life, including family, friends, colleagues, past clients, ex-boyfriends, rivals, anyone who might shed light. And within the first year after the murder, police had conducted nearly 1,500 interviews and received 752 tips and executed 30 search warrants. So this was an enormous volume of investigative work, reflecting just how many angles they were exploring for this case. And the major crime unit, led by Inspector Rob McCall, coordinated the efforts, and Detective Sergeant Chris Horsley became the public face of the case, often appealing for information and addressing rumors. And early on, the SPD acknowledged they were dealing with an exceptionally challenging case. And in a rare statement, a spokesperson called it a crime of quote-unquote extraordinary complexity, involving individuals who were experienced and quote-unquote had no regard for human life. And leads were pursued not just in Victoria, but across provincial lines, recognizing the possible wider connections, such as ties to Calgary or Vancouver criminal groups. And Saanich police welcomed help from outside agencies as well. And the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were brought in to provide oversight and specialized resources. And the case was also significant enough that the FBI agents from the United States were later consulted, particularly when it came to the new technology and behavioral analysis. And over the years, the investigation grew to staggering proportions. And by 2020, Saanich police said they had over 2,000 persons of interest or entities logged in the case file. And they had obtained in excess of 35 court warrants and production orders, targeting cell phone companies, internet providers, and even social media like Facebook to pull data relevant to the crime. But the sheer volume of information was immense, requiring meticulous organization and analysis. But detectives were determined to not let a single clue slip through the cracks, and they would also examine cell tower pings. And advanced techniques like DNA analysis were repeatedly applied to what few samples they had, though initially none yielded a suspect profile. And the house had been professionally cleaned just before the showing, as it was a newly staged house, so there was little trace of evidence in the environment to start with. So from day one, investigators and armchair detectives alike grappled with the burning question: who ordered the murder of Lindsay Buziak, and why? And over the years, several theories emerged, some pursued by police, others fueled by internet speculation. But we'll explore the main ones here, noting what evidence, if any, supports them and how authorities have responded. So first, we have Jason, Lindsay's boyfriend. Naturally, he would be the first suspect, and the first person that police would scrutinize. Because in most homicide investigations, you start with the inner circle or those closest to the victim. And Jason was right at the center. He was the one who found her body, and that often raises suspicion, obviously. So could Jason have been involved in setting up Lindsay? And motive-wise, the relationship had known troubles, as we know. Lindsay had considered leaving him, and there were rumors of jealousy as well. Some who distrusted Jason speculated he might have arranged to eliminate Lindsay if he couldn't bear to let her go. And it didn't help Jason's case in the public eye that his family was wealthy and influential, because people love to suspect the rich boyfriend in a true crime story. However, police have repeatedly stated that Jason Zalo is not a suspect, and that's because Jason's actions and alibi on the day the murder largely, completely check out. Because after lunch, he was indeed seen on surveillance video at the auto shop at around 5:30 p.m., leaving with Cohen in his Range Rover. And the timing on the CCTV proves he was not at the murder scene when Lindsay was killed, because she was likely being killed at 5:40 to 5:41 p.m., and it would have been difficult to make it there and pull it off in that time. And by difficult, I mean quite literally impossible. And additionally, Jason voluntarily underwent a polygraph test and passed it convincingly, according to police. And he handed over his phone and even participated in a detailed reenactment video with investigators walking through his discovery of Lindsay's body on camera to aid the investigation. Basically, he had no hesitation to volunteer any help to the police. He was extremely forthcoming throughout the entire investigation. And investigators found no forensic or digital evidence tying Jason to any part of the murder planning. And his cell phone records, for example, showed genuine attempts to find her and not any coordination with unknown parties. And about a year after the murder in early 2009, Saanich police formally cleared Jason of any sort of involvement. And they noted publicly, quote, "We've never said Zalo was a suspect. He was a person of interest, as would anybody found at the scene, but he's been ruled out," unquote. But despite this, Jason endured intense public suspicion for years. And Lindsay's father, Jeff, openly suggested Jason might know more than he let on, largely because Jeff felt Jason didn't show enough grief and because of Jason's family connections. But Jason has always maintained his innocence, saying, quote unquote,
"I want people to know that I love Lindsay, and I think about her every day. I want this case solved as fast as possible. I had nothing to do with it."
And it's worth noting that police had thoroughly interrogated Jason for hours the night of the murder, something that really frustrated him once he knew that the killers had fled. And he felt valuable time was being lost focusing on him initially. But from the police perspective, that was a necessary step, and once done, they moved on. And zero evidence has ever surfaced implicating Jason, and law enforcement and even Lindsay's own mother have accepted that Jason was not involved. And while quote-unquote the boyfriend did it is a common trope, this case appears to be the exception. And Jason's role was tragically just that of an unlucky witness who found the woman he loved in her final state. So if not Jason, what about someone else in the family? And online sleuths turn their gaze to Shirley, Jason's mother. Shirley was a successful realtor and a formidable personality by many accounts. And true crime forums have swirled with the speculation that Shirley could have orchestrated a hit on Lindsay out of some dark motive. Perhaps anger if Lindsay was planning to leave Jason, or other personal conflicts. And it didn't help that Shirley was directly connected to key elements of the scenario, like we talked about before. She was present when Lindsay discussed the showing details and the address, and the builder of the murder house, Joe D'Souza, was Shirley's friend. And some theorists pose the question that if Shirley were involved, that might explain how the killers knew Lindsay's schedule and chose that specific house. However, police have never named Shirley as a suspect even, and they have explicitly said that no member of the Zalo family is under any sort of suspicion. And Shirley provided an alibi for the time of the murder. She was actually out at dinner, by some reports, and cooperated with police interviews. And Lindsay's mother, Evelyn, publicly stated she does not believe Shirley had anything to do with it, calling the notion an unfounded rumor. And over the years, Shirley largely just stayed quiet about the rumors that have swirled, but by 2022, she'd had enough. And that year, Shirley filed a defamation lawsuit against Jeff Buziak, which is Lindsay's father, and two administrators of his website, accusing them of maliciously spreading false accusations that she was the murderer. In other words, Shirley took the extraordinary step of suing the victim's father to clear her name. And this underscores how deeply the unproven allegations had hurt her family. And the case is still ongoing and has not been resolved in court, but Shirley's position is clear, and she and her family have been unjustly vilified with zero evidence. And in interviews with Capital Daily, the Zalos expressed that they felt like, quote, went through a bad part of life, unquote, being targets of these accusations. And all that said, police did investigate the Zalo family thoroughly. And they looked into Shirley's finances, her business ties, and any possible link to burner phone or people behind it, but nothing incriminating was ever found. And the fact that Shirley heard part of the phone call appears to have just been coincidence, which, I mean, I don't think that's hard to believe. And she was Jason's mom, and it was known to often drop by. And Lindsay wasn't hiding her clients' communications. And while it's indeed eerie that the killer's house was built by Shirley's acquaintance, Joe D'Souza, police have never indicated Joe or Shirley were involved beyond that weird coincidence. So aside from internet suspicion, the case against Shirley is unsupported by hard evidence, and police cleared her as well as Jason's brother and anyone else in their orbit, and that was fairly early on. So the Zalos, in truth, suffered not only the loss of someone they cared about, and they insist that they deeply cared about Lindsay, but also damage to their reputation due to rampant speculation. But I also just can't help but feel horrible for Lindsay's family and them just wanting the truth, especially her father. But I mean, that doesn't excuse, defaming someone, but I think just wanting to know answers, I can't even imagine how that feels. So I feel for both the families. But one of the most intriguing and initially compelling theories had nothing to do with Lindsay's boyfriend or his family at all. And instead, it centered on something Lindsay supposedly saw that she shouldn't have moment. So in late 2007, about 2 months before her death, Lindsay took an impromptu weekend trip from Victoria to Calgary. And Calgary's in Alberta, which is the province right next to British Columbia. And this was to visit her father and old friends. And during this visit, she met up briefly with some acquaintances from her past, including, reportedly, the father of her ex-boyfriend. And around that time, a massive drug bust was unfolding in Calgary. And on January 2nd, 2008, police executed Operation High Noon, seizing over 80 kilograms of cocaine, worth $8 million, and arresting several high-level drug traffickers. And it was billed as the largest cocaine bust in Alberta's history. And in a startling coincidence, one of the people caught in the bust had a connection to Lindsay's circle. And that was Erickson de l'Alcazar, an acquaintance of Lindsay's from Victoria, and he was arrested as a major player in the Calgary drug ring. And this led to rampant speculation that perhaps Lindsay, during her Calgary trip, learned something about the drug operation, maybe overhearing a conversation or sealing a deal. And the cartel or gang involved decided to silence her, believing she maybe would snitch to police. And it is an extremely dramatic theory, the revenge of cartel carried out by contract killers posing as clients, and police have largely debunked this motive. Because first of all, they found no evidence Lindsay was an informant or had any role in the Calgary bust, and Calgary police themselves confirmed Lindsay wasn't on their radar at all. And Lindsay was known to be firmly anti-drug, as we know. And multiple friends said she never used and didn't endorse that lifestyle. And if she stumbled on criminal info, one would think she might have told a friend or her father, but she didn't. And Jeff would later claim that Lindsay hinted she saw something bad, but no proof of what that was ever emerged. And police also point out that the nature of Lindsay's murderer doesn't fit a professional cartel hit, because cartels, if retaliating against informants, tend to execute in a cleaner way. A shooting, for example, and often the bodies are left as a warning. But Lindsay's murder was frenzied and deeply personal, which is not typical of a hired hitman job. However, there are some unresolved curiosities that keep this theory on the table. And investigators confirmed that after returning from Calgary, Lindsay looked up the Facebook profile of a relative of someone arrested in the drug bust and even tried calling that person. Quote, "We don't know why she was on his Facebook. We don't know why she called him," unquote. And that was Detective Horsley admitting of the bizarre discovery. But I think, like, if something happened, like a drug bust, to someone you know, that would be absolutely insane. And I'd be looking up, like, what's going on and if they got busted and then calling to see if they did. I don't know. I just don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that she was just calling as a very concerned, warm person that she is. And crucially, the key players in the ring were already arrested by the time Lindsay was killed. So it's not as if the cartel was still at large, fearing exposure or anything. And in the end, while the Calgary connection may be alluring and was also popularized in a 2010 Dateline episode, Police eliminated it as a viable motive at all. And they publicly stated Lindsay's murder did not appear to be ordered by a cartel or drug gang, and the timing and method just didn't align. So with the most obvious suspects and scenarios ruled out, the investigation turned to more complex possibilities. And one such angle was that someone within the real estate industry or closely acquainted with Lindsay's work set her up. And this theory suggests an inside job element. Perhaps some agent at her job could access her schedule. Notably, the killers knew Lindsay would be alone at the house at the exact time, which hints that they had inside information on her appointments. And police did look at colleagues and even past clients, and there was gossip about disgruntled client or a jealous competitor, but nothing concrete materialized publicly. However, it was later uncovered that early in the case, police suspected certain violent individuals on Lindsay's Facebook friend list might have been involved. And Lindsay, by all accounts, was a friendly person who had over 100 Facebook friends, including some people with criminal backgrounds. And Victoria's social scene is such that you could know someone who knows someone, basically kind of thing. It's very tight-knit. So detectives initially thought perhaps one of those contacts with a shady past could have orchestrated the murder. And this line of inquiry appears to have dovetailed with both the drug theory and general suspicion of anyone in her orbit with criminal ties. But again, no definitive evidence ever came from it. And another theory considered whether organized crime beyond the drug angle might be involved, such as money laundering in real estate or someone Lindsay inadvertently offended in a property deal. And Saanich police have said publicly, to date, they found no link between Lindsay's legitimate real estate work and her murder beyond the ruse used to lure her. In other words, it wasn't a case of a deal gone bad or clients seeking revenge. The real estate viewing was just a convenient trap. And over time, investigators formed their own theory that aligns with the evidence. And that is that Lindsay's murder was a personal vendetta by someone or multiple people close to her. As one summary put it, quote unquote, the investigators believe Buziak's murder was very personal and planned by someone close to her, perhaps someone with access to inside information from her office. So this just points to a scenario where someone in Lindsay's social circle held a grudge or motive to harm her. And not necessarily a best friend, but maybe a friend of a friend or acquaintance. And they might have leveraged others, like the couple, to do the dirty work, keeping their own hands clean. And it could explain the rage in the killing and the personal motive combined with the cunning plan. But to this day, police have not publicly named any such individual, and it seems likely the conspiracy involved more than just the man and woman Lindsay met. Perhaps insiders who provided information or had the motive, and outsiders who carried it out. So the enduring mystery is identifying all these players and proving their roles. So to summarize this consensus, Lindsay Buziak's murder was a targeted killing, meticulously planned by one or more people who knew her personally or peripherally, and it was not random, not a burglary, not a crime of passion in the moment, but a premeditated assassination of a young woman for reasons that may stem from personal hatred, betrayal, or perceived threat. And over 15 years later, we are closer to understanding the how of the crime than why. The full truth remains locked behind lips that so far have refused to speak. And from 2008 through to today, Jeff, Lindsay's father, organizes an annual walk, a walk for justice in Lindsay's memory, every February 2nd, which is the anniversary of her death. And come rain or shine, Jeff leads supporters through the streets, holding banners and signs with Lindsay's photo and pleas for information. And these walks have grown to attract dozens, sometimes over 100 people, all marching to remind the community that a killer or killers still walk free. Quote unquote, until there are arrests made, I will continue walking, Jeff vowed. And as of 2025, he has kept that promise for 17 consecutive years. And the walk usually starts at Saanich Municipal Hall and ends at the BC Legislature, symbolically taking the call for justice to the authorities' doorstep. And Jeff also harnessed the power of the internet early on, and he created a website, lindsaybuziakmurder.com, intended as both a memorial and a hub for tips and discussion. And that site became a double-edged sword. because on one hand, it provided an avenue for members of the public to submit information anonymously, and for Jeff to publish his thoughts and any updates or theories he endorsed. But on the other hand, it also became a hotbed of speculation, hosting wild theories and at least one malicious fake confession as well. And Jeff moderated the site with help from volunteer administrators, but there were times when emotions ran high and defamatory content was posted. But despite these controversies, the site undeniably kept Lindsay's case in public consciousness. And in media appearances, Jeff has been candid and relentless, and he's given countless interviews to local and national outlets. Perhaps most famously, he appeared on Dr. Phil's television show in an episode aired on May 2019 to talk about Lindsay's case and plead for tips. And during these interviews, Jeff became increasingly vocal that he felt the police investigation was incompetent and corrupt, and he's even floated theories of police cover-ups and high-level interference, though without any hard evidence. And that's when the suing from Shirley came, and the detectives asked him to stop publicly defaming them as well. So it's just been a whirlwind of accusations. Yet despite any interpersonal dramas, all agree on the core point, and that is that Lindsay deserves justice. And as of early 2025, no arrests have been made and no charges filed. However, law enforcement appears more confident than ever in the direction of the case. And SPD officials have hinted that they, quote-unquote, have an inside track on who it was, but are waiting for that final puzzle piece. So this suggests that investigation is in the phase of building a prosecutable case, gathering hard evidence like DNA, corroborating witness testimonies, or perhaps hoping someone from the conspirators' circle flips. But one challenge the case status faces with each passing year is the statute of limitations on public attention, because memories fade, witnesses get harder to track down, and physical evidence can degrade. But the silver lining is there is no statute of limitations on murder in Canada, thank goodness. And the case can remain open indefinitely until solved. And the police seem determined to see it through. But that is the case of Lindsay Buziak. If for whatever reason you have any information at all on this case, I highly suggest you call the Saanich Police Department. And again, my heart goes out to the families involved. If you have any other cases you want me to deep dive into and to let you guys know about, let me know in the comments below. And until then, I will see your beautiful face, okay? The quiet streets of Rexburg, Idaho once seemed like the last place where horror could take root. But behind closed doors in the shadows of suburban homes, a story was unfolding. A story so twisted it blurred the line between faith and fanaticism, love and obsession, and life and death. It's a descent into the world of apocalyptic visions, secret pacts, and chilling disappearances. A world where those closest to you could suddenly be branded as something less than human, and where that judgment carried a deadly cost. We're pulling back the veil on the case that shook a community, that gripped a nation, and revealed just how dark belief can become when it turns into something else entirely. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded. Today, we are talking about an absolutely crazy case that I had not heard about, and it didn't happen long ago, but it is highly disturbing. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through the windshield into these doomsday cult murders together. Chad Guy Daybell was born in Provo, Utah, and raised in the nearby city of Springville. He grew up in a Mormon family and served a 2-year mission in New Jersey in his youth. And after high school, he attended Brigham Young University, or BYU, where he studied journalism. And while at BYU, Chad married Tammy Douglas on March 9th, 1990. And the couple eventually had 5 children and settled into an ordinary family life. Now, in the early 1990s, Chad worked as a sexton, which is essentially a grave digger for a church, at a cemetery in Springville to help pay for college. And he later said he had 2 near-death experiences as a young man, which profoundly influenced him. And those experiences, according to Chad, heightened his spiritual beliefs and gave him supposed insight into the afterlife. themes that would feature in his later writings, as we will see. So after graduating from BYU with a BA in journalism, Chad took a job as a copy editor for a local newspaper in Ogden, Utah. And colleagues from that time recall him as quiet and unremarkable. Ouch. Because he did not openly discuss any unusual spiritual experiences then, but Chad's real ambitions lay in writing. So in 2001, he published his first book, 1 Foot in the Grave, a collection of bizarre stories from his grave digging days. And finding modest success in the niche market of Latter-day Saint or LDS fiction, Chad and Tammy started a small publishing company called Spring Creek Book Company to self-publish his novels. And he wrote doomsday-themed religious novels, including a series about the end of the world, blending LDS theology with apocalyptic scenarios. What is this sounding like? Say it with me. Cult! 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 And by the mid-2010s, Chad had also begun publishing books by other aspiring LDS authors, notably near-death experience accounts. And in 2014, he published author Julie Rowe's visionary experiences, and around that time confided that the events in his own novels were based on visions he claimed to have had. So Chad's growing fixation on end times prophecies coincided with a major life change. And in 2015, claiming he received a personal revelation, he uprooted his entire family from Utah and moved to Salem, Idaho. And Tammy got a job as an assistant librarian there, and they relocated their publishing business as well. And friends would later note that Chad's personality had grown increasingly weird and obsessed with apocalyptic ideas around this time. Say it with me. Cult, cult, cult. It's just screaming future cult leader, isn't it? But still, those who knew him say there were few obvious red flags. And former neighbors and friends mostly saw him as a religious but soft-spoken family man and author. And no one could have predicted that within a few years, Chad Daybell would be at the center of a string of suspicious deaths and murders. So Lori Noreen Vallow Daybell was born on June 26, 1973 in Loma Linda, California, formerly known with the last name Cox. And she was also raised in a Mormon family, but her upbringing was unusual because her parents were anti-tax protesters aligned with sovereign citizen ideology, often clashing with the IRS. And as a young woman, Lori was very attractive, outgoing, and for a time worked as a hairstylist. And she also dabbled in the spotlight, because in 2004 she competed in the Mrs. Texas beauty pageant and even appeared on the game show Wheel of Fortune. I used to love that game show. But Lori's personal life was turbulent. She would marry young at 19 to her high school boyfriend in 1992, but that first marriage ended in a quick divorce. Her second marriage came a few years later in October 1995, when she wed a man named William LaJoya, and they had a son, Colby, born in 1996. So by 1998, that marriage too had failed. Not a great track record. And in 2001, Lori married for a third time to Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., who became a stepfather to Colby and gave the boy his last name. So Lori and Joseph had a daughter together named Tylee Ryan, born in 2002. And this third marriage was highly bitter for the two of them, and they would divorce in 2005 amid a resentful custody battle during which Lori accused Joseph of abusing Colby and Tylee. And in 2007, Lori's brother Alexander, or Alex Cox, actually attacked Joseph, claiming he had been abusive to Lori and the kids. Now, Alex Cox served 90 days in jail for that assault. And years later, Colby would confirm that he had indeed been molested as a child, though the claim had not been fully proven. And tragically, Joseph died from arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease in 2018. And police briefly re-examined Joseph's 2018 death for foul play, but found nothing suspicious and closed the case. And Lori's fourth marriage would tie her to the Vallow family, as we know her today. And in February 2006, she married Charles Vallow, a businessman from Arizona. And Charles was a devout Catholic who converted to Lori's LDS faith after their wedding. And together they raised Lori's two children, Colby and Tylee. And in 2013, the couple lovingly adopted Charles' grandnephew, Joshua Jackson, or JJ Vallow, who was then a baby. So JJ was the biological grandson of Charles' sister, Kay Woodcock, and Kay's husband, Larry. Now, the Woodcocks had cared for JJ as an infant, and the baby was unfortunately born drug exposed due to his biological parents' substance abuse. And this was before the Vallows adopted him, of course. So JJ had special needs and required a constant, loving routine, and he would be later diagnosed with autism. But by all accounts, Charles and Lori provided a very stable home for little JJ, and Lori was a loving mother to both Tylee and JJ in those early years. So the family lived in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, and even spent a few idyllic years in Kauai, Hawaii, running a small business before returning back to Arizona around 2017. But beneath the appearance of normalcy, however, Lori's priorities were shifting dramatically by the late 2010s, and she became increasingly obsessed with doomsday prophecies and extremist religious teachings. And friends and family later noted that Lori's personality started to change, and she began insisting she had a divine purpose and that darkness surrounded those who opposed her. And these growing radical beliefs, combined with Chad Daybell's influence, once the two eventually met, would set Lori on a dark path that few could have imagined. So Lori Vallow first crossed paths with Chad Daybell in October of 2018 at a religious conference in St. George, Utah. And the event was part of a preparedness and prophecy-focused series called Preparing a People, and it attracted LDS church members interested in end times teachings. And Chad was one of the speakers at this conference, presenting his apocalyptic theories and promoting his novels about the end of the world and all of his, afterlife prophecies that he's been having. And Lori would attend with a close friend, Melanie Gibb, and another associate, Zulema Pastenis. And Lori, at this point, had already been reading Chad's fiction and was a fan of his Doomsday podcast appearances. And when she heard him speak in person, she was immediately drawn in by his charisma and unconventional prophetic claims. And according to later testimony, when Lori and Chad were introduced at the conference, it was as if a spark ignited. A just giant shitstorm of a spark that would start a damn forest fire. So they would spend the weekend talking intensely about spiritual visions and their belief that they had met before in previous lifetimes. And flattered and intrigued, Lori absorbed Chad's every word, just gobbled it up. Despite the fact that both of them were married to other people at the time, Lori to Charles Vallow and Chad to Tammy Daybell, they formed an instant secret connection. And it's reported that during their very first conversation, Chad declared Lori was an eternal being of great significance. I've been told my eyes look pretty, but not that. That might get me. Just kidding. No, it wouldn't. These people are literally insane. But this kind of flattery and grand destiny just immediately appealed to Lori, who already had a few screws loose, if you know what I mean, and who already begun to view herself as someone with a special role in the end times. So in the weeks and months following that initial meeting, Lori and Chad's relationship escalated quickly and in alarming secrecy. And they began corresponding regularly. So it started as discussions about scripture, and Chad's unusual beliefs soon turned into open affection. And by late 2018, Chad and Lori did their best to see each other despite living in different states and still being married to other people, and Chad being in Idaho and Lori being in Arizona. But Chad would visit Arizona to see Lori under various pretenses, and Lori made trips north to Idaho as well. And it was during this period that Chad, who fancied himself a prophet, claimed he had received revelations about Lori. Very convenient, Chad. And he told her that she was an exalted godlike being appointed to carry out a special mission in the coming apocalypse. And that he, Chad, had been her husband in multiple past lives. Ah, man, it goes like so far beyond narcissism to think this of yourself, to just like come up with this and try to convince somebody else of this. And then you just got to meet somebody equally as narcissistic as you, and probably just not well. But it's bonkers to me. Anyway, according to Lori's close friend, Melanie Gibb, Chad and Lori firmly believed they had been eternally bonded and sealed by God, transcending their current marriages. How convenient for them. I don't think you can put that on divorce papers for a cause, but all right. So their affair intensified as Chad's prophecy grew more fantastical. And he convinced Lori that they had a grand destiny together to lead their righteous after society's imminent collapse. And they communicated in code and sometimes used burner phones to hide their frequent contact. And Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, discovered the affair in early 2019 and confronted Lori about it, but she dismissed his concerns. Again, how convenient for her, just being like, nah, it's crazy. That's crazy. I'm just an all-knowing being who's been eternally connected to this random man from Idaho. I don't know. Or Arizona. I don't know. And in fact, Charles grew so alarmed by Lori's radical talk and infidelity that he filed for divorce in February of 2019, actually citing that Lori believed she was a god preparing for Christ's second coming and had threatened to kill him if he stood in her way. I wonder what section you gotta put that under. I'd like to see that paperwork. But Lori managed to delay the divorce by persuading Charles to reconcile shortly after. But the damage was done, and she was fully emotionally invested in Chad Daybell by then. And as their secret romance grew, Chad bolstered Lori's devotion by weaving an elaborate spiritual narrative around it. And he told Lori that she had been a celestial goddess in previous eras, and that he had been her divine consort. And at one point, Chad claimed Lori was once married to the ancient biblical figure James the Less, who he also claimed to be in that past life. And that Lori herself had been various historical figures of great spiritual significance, including and not limited to the wife of the angel Moroni, a key figure in LDS scripture. And he also said he was able to see their past lives together and that heavenly beings had brought them for a higher purpose. Just blah, blah, blah. Just so much bullshit. It's just crazy. It's crazy, but they're living in their little fantasy world, and that would be fine if they weren't evil, which they are. And for Lori, who had long been devout but never particularly famous or powerful, these claims were intoxicating because, narcissist. And she embraced the role Chad gave her wholeheartedly. And by mid-2019, Lori and Chad were deeply entangled, emotionally, spiritually, and even conspiratorially, because both still had spouses at home, yet they were making plans for their future together. And they even discussed that certain people close to them might need to die because evil spirits were inhabiting them and blocking their mission. Evil! And this is basically just a terrifying foreshadowing of what was to come. So in short, what began as an affair rooted in fringe religious obsession quickly evolved into a dangerous pact. And Chad and Lori's love story would soon leave a trail of broken lives and deaths in its wake. While researching these very heavy stories and after researching them, I usually need something to ground myself or something to kind of fidget with while I'm doing it, because I have pretty bad anxiety. But something that's really simple and keeps my hands busy while I'm processing everything is actually Fume Zero. Thank you to Fume Zero for sponsoring and supporting this channel. But Fume Zero, for those of you who don't know, is the brand new grab-and-go flavored air device from Fume. And look, I get it. We all need something to help us decompress, because I know I do. And that's why I love what Fume Zero does differently, because it's single-use, preloaded, and ready to go. No charging, no refill, no setup. And at just $24.99, you can get started. But here's the thing, it's zero nicotine, zero vapor, and zero batteries. This is not a vape. I'm very anti-vape. It's flavored air made with natural plant-based cores, and you get 6 flavors and over 10 days of use. And I'm personally partial to crisp mint, but there's peach blush, raspberry, and something for everyone. And the adjustable airflow lets you dial in your ideal draw with a simple twist. And plus, it's fidget friendly by design, with this smooth triangular shape and subtle click mechanism. And it even has a chewable tip for when you need something to hold onto. It's designed to replace the ritual, giving you that hand-to-mouth satisfaction without the guilt or chemicals. So take zero chances with Fume Zero today. Available for just $24.99 USD. You can head to tryfume.com, that's TRYFUM.com, to start with zero. Because sometimes the best evidence of change is the habit you leave behind. So start with zero and stick with Fume. So Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow didn't form a formal church, if you will, but they crafted a personalized belief system so extreme that it essentially functioned like a cult within their circle. And their doctrine was a distorted offshoot of mainstream LDS or Mormon teachings blended with New Age mysticism and apocalyptic fanaticism. Say it with me. Cult, cult, cult. And central to Chad and Lori's theology was the looming end of the world. What do we know about every single cult we've ever gone over is that there's always an end of the world prophecy, because that's convenient for the narrative, because you got to be afraid of something that's coming, so you got to believe in what these people are saying, otherwise you're going to die in the doomsday or whatever. It's dominant. It keeps happening. How does this keep happening? There's so many videos about it. Just know if somebody comes at you and they're like, hey, by the way, you got to believe in me because the aliens are coming back and I'm Jesus 2.0 and this is going to happen and you got to give me $10,000 and leave your whole family. It's a cult. Anyway, Chad often prophesized that the final apocalypse was imminent. And at one point, he pinpointed July 22nd, 2020 as the date the world would end. The significant date every single cult leader does. It's always a date. But he claimed to have special prophetic gifts, including visions of future destruction and the ability to discern people's spiritual identities. And Chad told followers, and Lori fervently believed, that he had lived 31 past lives on various Earth-like planets. And Lori had lived 21 past lives, 5 of those with Chad as her spouse. And this idea of reincarnation, or multiple mortal probations, is far outside Orthodox Mormon doctrine. But Chad insisted it was true and necessary for achieving exaltation, which is external glory. And one of the most disturbing aspects of their belief system was a cosmology of light versus dark spirits. And Chad taught that every person was either inhibited by a light spirit aligned with Jesus Christ, or a dark spirit aligned with Satan. And he even devised a numeric rating system to score an individual's spiritual lightness or darkness on a scale. And with those deeply dark considered to be under demonic influence. And according to Chad, if someone was taken over by a particularly evil entity, their true spirit was forced out and their body was then inhabited by a demon. So essentially rendering them a zombie in Chad and Lori's terminology. And they taught that these zombies looked like normal people but were no longer truly alive. And the possessing dark spirit would need to be driven out or destroyed. And frighteningly, Chad and Lori concluded that the only sure way to eradicate a zombie was to kill the host body, thereby releasing the person's original spirit from limbo and killing the evil spirit as well. So this lethal doctrine effectively turns certain people in their lives into targets for elimination under a twisted religious justification. And Chad also claimed to receive continuous revelations through a veil to the spiritual world. And he told followers he could open portals to other realms and communicate with angels and even deceased beings to get instructions. How convenient for Chad. Also, what cult leader's name is Chad? If I ever follow a Chad, hit me over the head, all right? And Lori soon declared she, too, had a direct line to God. And she believed she was a prophesized exalted goddess sent to lead the righteous in the end times. And that as such, she was not subject to earthly consequences. Quote, she couldn't be held responsible for her actions on earth, unquote. One friend reported Lori believed. Isn't that convenient? Wouldn't it be nice to just steal from your local Walmart, get caught and be like, I'm not an earthly being. I'm a goddess from another planet and I've lived 31 lives. None of these rules apply to me. And they're just like, oh, got it. Got it. Enjoy the sunglasses and sweater. That's fine. Who are these people? But they both talked about certain faithful people being translated beings, essentially having transcended to a higher spiritual level that gave them powers like not needing to eat or the ability to teleport at will. Needless to say, these ideas are not taught by any official LDS doctrine. Rather, Chad and Lori just cherry-picked religious concepts and rewrote them to the extreme, as one religious scholar observed. So to outsiders, the Daybell Vallow belief system sounded like wild fiction, like it does to you and I hope. But within their echo chamber, Chad in particular was very persuasive, like we see with a lot of cults. But when you're in that, when you're like feeling as low, you have like nothing to your name, you're not close with family, you don't have anyone, and somebody's just lifting you up saying you're like an extraterrestrial goddess being, you're gonna be like, oh my God, really? I don't know, I'm saying like crazy and insane and all that kind of stuff. And it is, but I also have extreme sympathy for people that don't harm people. I don't have any sympathy for Lori and Chad, by the way. I think they're evil pieces of shit, but I digress. But anyway, Chad, he was persuasive. He spoke with calm conviction about secret church history, lost scriptures, and his own visions. And Lori became his most ardent disciple, and then an equal partner in promoting these radical beliefs. And they began performing prayer rituals they called castings, essentially exorcism ceremonies where a group would pray and use energy to expel evil spirits from identified, quote unquote, dark individuals. And these sessions often targeted people close to Lori, whom she had begun to view as obstacles or threats. And those people were her husband, Charles, and even her own children, for example. So through 2019, Chad and Lori increasingly lived in a self-constructed world of prophecy and paranoia, where they alone knew God's true plan, and where extreme actions could be not only justified, but divinely mandated. So Chad and Lori's fringe ideas didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were nurtured by an existing network of doomsday preachers and prepper conferences. And in the LDS community, there was a circuit of podcasts, books, and lecture series under themes like preparing a people that catered to those fascinated by end-of-days prophecy. So it didn't just come from anywhere. It was, the LDS was preaching this to some capacity, but Chad and Lori just took it to the extreme. So Chad became a minor celebrity in these circles, and he spoke at events and appeared on podcasts discussing his near-death experiences and end-of-times visions, attracting followers who found him insightful or at least entertaining. And the Preparing a People organization, which was essentially a media/podcast group, hosted many of these conferences and initially featured Chad prominently. And Lori Vallow, for her part, eagerly jumped into this world. So around 2017 to 2018, she was increasingly reading books on LDS prophecy and listening to podcasts by excommunicated LDS members who claimed special knowledge of the end times. And it was through these channels Lori met individuals like Melanie Gibb, who co-hosted a podcast with her, and Zulema Pastenis, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, who shared or at least tolerated these extreme spiritual discussions. So Lori was soon co-hosting podcasts alongside Chad and others, spreading their doctrine to online audiences. And on these shows, they spoke about urgent preparedness, spiritual warfare against demons, and coming transformation of the world. And they started referring to a select group of believers as the Church of the Firstborn, which Chad claimed to lead as the head prophet. How convenient for Chad. And it's important to note this was not an official church, but rather an informal sect or group that recognized Chad's authority. So within this inner circle, a small but devoted following formed by late 2018 and into 2019. And participants included Lori's brother, Alex Cox, Lori's niece, Melanie Pawlowski, Melanie Gibb, and Zulema Pastenis, among others. And they would meet to discuss spiritual revelations, perform the aforementioned casting ceremonies, and reinforce each other's belief in Chad and Lori's special roles. And Lori and Chad taught their followers how to detect if someone was possessed by a dark spirit, or the so-called zombies, and would even identify specific people as being taken over by evil. And disturbingly, by mid-2019, they had labeled several people close to them dark or zombies, including Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, Lori's children, Tylee and JJ, and Chad's wife, Tammy. and Lori's nephew-in-law, Brandon Bardreau. This all just sounds like a very convenient ploy to get the people closest to them and who are in the way out of the way, aka evil. And to the group, these individuals were obstacles to God's plan and perhaps better off dead. And Alex Cox, in particular, was deeply influenced. And he believed wholly in the threat of demonic possession and saw himself as Lori's protector or warrior, ready to deal with these zombies if necessary. The movement around Chad and Lori had all the hallmarks of a cult, as we know. We have a charismatic duo claiming exclusive truth, apocalyptic urgency, dehumanization of outsiders as evil, and the encouragement of extreme measures for a higher cause. And as one commentator put it, Chad and Lori essentially created a quote-unquote Mormon fanfic, a radicalized, fictionalized spin on LDS beliefs taken to violent extremes. So by the time 2019 rolled around, this doomsday cult mindset had fully consumed them and their core followers. And it was only a matter of time before these beliefs turned into action with deadly consequences. All right, let's step away from the heavy stuff for a minute and talk about something that everyone does, and that's eating. For me, putting the best food into my body has been really important lately, and one of my favorite things to eat is seafood. And when was the last time you truly trusted seafood you brought home? I know I question it every single time, from nutrition and taste to sustainability, until I discovered Wild Alaskan Company. Wild Alaskan Company is the best way to get wild-caught, perfectly portioned, nutrient-dense seafood delivered directly to your door. And trust me, you have not tasted fish this good. And I'm very particular with fish. I'm from British Columbia, Canada, okay? We got good fish up there. And opening my first box was like Christmas morning. Each portion perfectly vacuum sealed and clearly labeled. And I started personally with the sockeye salmon. That is my favorite. Just pan-seared it with lemon and butter. And the color alone was incredible. That deep red you only get from wild fish. And the flavor was nothing like the bland stuff from the grocery store. This actually tastes like the ocean in the best way possible. And here's what matters. It's 100% wild caught, never farmed, no antibiotics, GMOs, or additives. Just clean, real fish frozen right off the boat to lock in taste, texture, and those omega-3s we all need. And every order supports sustainable harvesting practices in Alaska, which is incredibly important. And though I love sockeye salmon, my go-to lately has actually been Pacific halibut. It's firm, meaty, and perfect for grilling. But the sockeye and coho salmon are a close second. Plus, there's a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're not completely satisfied with your first box, you get a full refund, no questions asked. But trust me, you won't be asking for a refund because this stuff is delicious. But not all fish are the same, so get seafood you can trust and go to wildalaskan.com/CCCM for $35 off your first box of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/CCCM for $35 off your first order. Thank you so much to Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode and supporting this channel, and let's get back to it. So 2019 saw an escalation of events around Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, as people close to them began to die or disappear under suspicious circumstances. And the timeline of key incidences is as follows. So in early 2019, Lori's marriage to Charles was rapidly deteriorating, as we know. And in January of 2019, police were called when Charles grew concerned about Lori's mental state, because she had made bizarre claims about being a divine being and vanished for nearly 2 months, abandoning her kids and her husband, only to return as if nothing happened. And in February of 2019, Charles Vallow filed for divorce, and he told the court that Lori believed she was a god preparing for the second coming, and that the apocalypse was near, and that she had threatened to kill him if he interfered with her mission. And although Charles later withdrew the divorce petition, hoping to reconcile, he confided in family that he feared for his safety, and Lori's behavior was growing more and more extreme under Chad's influence. And she even told Charles he had become a dark spirit named Ned Schneider, who had taken over his body. I didn't realize these zombies had, names. It's strange, but okay. But these ominous accusations just set the stage for what was to come next. So on a summer morning in Chandler, Arizona, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, shot and killed Charles Fallow, Lori's fourth husband. And the official story given to police was that Charles had come to pick up JJ, his kid, at Lori's house, gotten into a confrontation, and hit Alex with a baseball bat, leading Alex to Charles in supposed self-defense. And Lori and Tylee were present in the house at the time of this altercation, though allegedly Tylee had left the house with JJ before the shooting occurred. But after the shooting, Lori made no effort to call 911, and it was Alex who phoned the police about 43 minutes later, by which time Charles lay dead on the floor. And investigators found Lori's demeanor strangely casual, and she was described as smiling and joking while police processed the scene, an attitude one detective described as quote-unquote oddly nonchalant, given her husband had just been killed. And no charges were filed against Alex at the time, as police initially accepted the self-defense claim. However, subsequent evidence deeply undercut that story. And text messages that were later uncovered show Lori had encouraged Alex days earlier to be like Nephi, who was a Book of Mormon figure who righteously killed an evil man. And this was apparently referring to Charles. And Zulema, Alex's future wife, but at the time girlfriend, testified that when she asked Alex how he felt about killing Charles, he said he didn't feel bad. Quote, Zulema, he was a zombie, unquote. A man lost his life because this monster bitch convinced her brother that he was a zombie? What is happening? And this was not long ago. This was a few years ago. But this indicates Alex was acting under the shared belief that Charles was possessed by a dark entity and that killing him was justified, divinely justified, even merciful in some up way. And Charles' death, ruled self-defense in 2019, would later be revisited by authorities. So after Charles' death, the dominoes continued to fall quickly. See, Lori had access to $1 million in life insurance that Charles carried, or so she thought. Because unbeknownst to her, Charles had changed the beneficiary to his sister Kay Woodcock in early 2019, explicitly because he feared Lori might kill him for the money, which just makes this whole thing even more sad. Like, I know that they had motive because he was a zombie or something, but I'm sure the money probably helped with that. And for her to do that and just to figure out there's no money in it is just, I mean, I'm glad she got no money out of it, but like, God, just this world is filled with evil people. So within weeks of Charles' shooting, Lori dramatically altered her life. And by late August 2019, Lori left Arizona and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, bringing Tylee, who's 16 at the time, and JJ, who was 7 at the time, and Alex Cox with her. And Chad Daybell lived just outside Rexburg, and it appears Lori was relocating to be near Chad and joined their households. And they told friends they were gathering in Rexburg because it would be a place of refuge during the coming apocalypse. So Lori rented a townhouse in Rexburg with Alex Cox, indicating they continued to operate as a team. And Alex would eventually move into his own townhouse adjacent to Lori. But shortly after the move to Idaho, Lori's 2 children, who were the last major obstacles to the couple's future, vanished under mysterious circumstances. Tylee Ryan, who was 16, was last seen on September 8th, 2019. And on that day, Lori, Alex, Tylee, and JJ took a day trip to Yellowstone National Park. And a photograph of them at the park entrance is the final image of Tylee alive. And data from Alex Cox's cell phone shows that early the next morning, September 9th, Alex was at Chad Daybell's backyard property for roughly 2 hours, specifically in the area of the Daybell family pet cemetery. And that same morning, Chad sent a curious text to his wife, Tammy, claiming he had shot a raccoon and buried it in the pet cemetery. Investigators now believe this was Chad's cover story for why he had dug a grave on the property. In reality, on September 9th, Tylee's life had likely already been taken, murdered by Alex and or Chad, and buried clandestinely in Chad's yard. And Tylee's remains would later be found burned at the site. just disgusting. I'm just like, I can't believe these people exist. I cannot believe these people exist. Yeah, it's horrifying. And my heart goes out to Tylee and the family that actually loves her. And on September 22nd, 2019, JJ Vallow was seen alive for what would be the last time. JJ, a 7-year-old, had been attending school in Rexburg. Lori enrolled him on September 3rd, but withdrew him after just 3 weeks, saying she would homeschool him. And on September 22nd, JJ was at Lori's apartment when friends, Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend, were visiting. And they later reported that Alex Cox carried a seemingly sleeping JJ into the house that night. And by the next morning, September 23rd, JJ was gone. And Lori told visiting friends that Alex had taken JJ away because the boy had been misbehaving. But in truth, investigators believe JJ was killed that night of September 22nd, asphyxiated by Alex Cox. And phone records show Alex went to Chad's property again on September 23rd for only a short period, likely to bury JJ's body in a shallow grave. So with Tylee and JJ now missing, Lori began a campaign of deceit to pretend everything was fine. She never reported her children missing, by the way. Instead, she just lied to everyone about their whereabouts. And Lori told some people that Tylee was away at BYU and told others that JJ was with relatives back in Arizona. And in late September 2019, Lori even asked her friend Melanie Gibb to tell police, if asked, that JJ was staying with her in Arizona. So it's not just their mother, it is friends, it is adults co-conspirating together about the murder of children. And this falsehood was tested in late November when police indeed came knocking. So not long after the children vanished, another violent act struck someone connected to Lori. And that was Brandon Boudreau, the ex-husband of Lori's niece, Melanie. And on October 2nd in Gilbert, Arizona, Brandon was shot at in front of his home by someone driving a Jeep registered to late Charles Vallow. And the bullet narrowly missed Brandon's head. And he survived and called police, identifying the vehicle. And Brandon had been vocal that Melanie fell in with Lori's cult and that he feared for his life. And authorities suspect Alex Cox was the triggerman in the attempted murder, likely on Lori and Chad's orders, using Charles' Jeep. And this was part of what prosecutors later described as Lori's pattern: eliminate people seen as dark or as obstacles. And Brandon might have been perceived as a dark influence, keeping Melanie from fully joining Lori's fold. And he was also the beneficiary of a life insurance policy that Melanie might gain if he died. Just cult, classic cult, just gathering people's money and gathering people to do their bidding. Just evil. And Melanie had embraced Lori and Chad's teachings, and she abruptly moved to Rexburg in October to be closer to them. So while Brandon survived, the shooter was not immediately caught, and this incident would remain unsolved until the broader case unraveled. So on the evening of October 9th, Chad's wife, Tamara, or Tammy Daybell, had a frightening encounter, and she called 911 and reported that a masked man approached her in her driveway and shot at her with what she thought was a paintball gun. So Tammy was shaken but unharmed, as the gun apparently misfired or just missed. And she posted about the incident on Facebook, describing the masked figure and asking if anyone knew of teenagers playing pranks. And investigators now believe this was Alex Cox's first attempt to murder Tammy on behalf of Chad and Lori. And cell phone records place Alex in the vicinity of the Daybell home that night. And Lori, Zulema, and Melanie were together when they received a phone call informing them of the attempt. And Zulema recalled Lori reacting with anger, saying, quote, "He can't do anything right," unquote, likely referring to Alex failing to kill Tammy. So this foiled attempt was a grim foreshadowing, because 10 days later, tragedy would strike. And Tammy Daybell, aged 49, died suddenly in her sleep on October 19th at the Daybell home in Salem, Idaho. And Chad claimed Tammy had retired the night before with a terrible cough and just never woke up. And when he called 911, he described it as a peaceful death. But Tammy was allegedly a very healthy, active woman, so this was incredibly shocking. Nevertheless, the Fremont County coroner initially ruled Tammy's death natural, and this was without an autopsy based on Chad's account that she had been ill, which is insane given the overall numerous deaths that are happening around this family. But Tammy's body would be buried in Springville, Utah on October 22nd, and the family held a brief memorial in Idaho as well. At the time, no one suspected foul play for some reason, except perhaps those in Chad and Lori's inner circle, of course, because Lori had been telling friends for months that Chad's wife would die early. And she even confidently stated Tammy would be out of the picture soon. And Chad had supposedly foreseen Tammy's death, and now it appeared those predictions came true. He murdered her. So investigators believe Tammy was murdered by asphyxiation, and likely Chad and Alex conspired to make it happen. And when Tammy's body was exhumed in December of 2019, a later autopsy concluded she died by homicidal suffocation, not a health issue. So just 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were married in an idyllic beach ceremony in Kauai, Hawaii. Married. 2 weeks after. Just not suspicious. I know that she was exhumed and they found it out later, but my God. They're just screaming, "We killed her." And how disrespectful. It's, again, just evil, 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 evil people. And the destination wedding was small and quiet. And Lori sported a white dress and a new ring. And significantly, Lori had purchased her wedding ring on October 2nd, weeks before Tammy even died. And that ring was ordered via Charles Vallow's Amazon account, her late husband's Amazon account. These people can't get more disgusting. I can't. It was just an eerie detail showing all sorts of premeditation. And for Chad to remarry so quickly was shocking to those who knew him, because Tammy had been his wife of 29 years. And yet within days, he was exchanging vows with Lori on a sunny beach in Hawaii. And back in Idaho, Chad told neighbors that Lori was an empty nester with no young kids, and Lori claimed Tylee had died years earlier, which are blatant falsehoods to cover up the absence of their children, their deceased children. And in a final twist to 2019's cascade of suspicious deaths, Alex Cox himself died on December 12th, 2019, at the age of 51. And earlier that month, events had started catching up with Lori and Chad. And Alex had married Zulema Pastenis on December 1st, and they were in the Phoenix area, specifically Gilbert, Arizona. And on December 11th, news broke that Tammy Daybell's body had been exhumed for an autopsy. And Chad and Lori reportedly called Alex that day, informing him and perhaps panicking about what might be found. You know, the consequences of their actions. And according to Zulema's later account, that night, Alex was extremely upset and mumbled to her, quote, "I think I'm being their fall guy," unquote. Yeah, you're their puppet, you idiot. Which I have no sympathy for him either. He murdered kids. And less than 24 hours later, after he said that to his new wife, Alex collapsed in his new wife's bathroom and died. And the cause was officially blood clots in his lungs, complicated by high blood pressure. And the Maricopa County Medical Examiner ruled Alex's death natural causes. However, given the extraordinary pattern of deaths around Lori, some have wondered if Alex was poisoned or if stress simply caught up with him. I'm gonna guess he was murdered, but what do I know? I can only put the pieces together. 1 + 1 = 2, I think. But either way, Alex died with many secrets. And Zulema mentioned that a few days prior, Alex told her he had hidden a bag of money in their closet in case anything happens to me. It's as if Alex foresaw that the walls were closing in on him. So by the end of 2019, Chad and Lori had left a wake of tragedy. Lori's husband, Charles, was dead. Lori's 2 children were missing, and unbeknownst to anyone then, murdered. And Chad's wife, Tammy, was dead. And Alex, who had likely carried out 2 of those killings, was now dead as well. But authorities were finally on their trail, thanks in large part to concerned family members asking tough questions. So the stage was set for the investigation to break the case open. So after months of deceit and evasion by Chad and Lori, the disappearance of the two children, JJ and Tylee, became impossible to hide. And law enforcement, spurred by worried relatives, began an intense investigation in early 2020 that would ultimately expose the couple's horrific deeds. So extended family sounded the alarm. Kay and Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandparents, had grown increasingly worried after not hearing from the normally bubbly 7-year-old for months. And Kay Woodcock, Charles Vallo's sister, knew something was very, very wrong when Lori cut off all communication. And on November 26 of 2019, prompted by the Woodcocks, the Rexburg Police Department performed a welfare check at Lori's townhouse in Idaho, looking for JJ. And Lori coolly told officers that JJ was safe and staying with a friend, Melanie Gibb, in Arizona. So police would reach out to Melanie Gibb, who would lie to police on behalf of Lori because Lori told her to do so. But luckily, she soon recanted and revealed that JJ was not with her at all. And by the next day, November 27th, Rexburg police returned with a search warrant, only to find that Lori and Chad had fled. And the couple took off from Idaho, leaving behind all of Lori's kids' belongings, and later were traced to Hawaii. And this abandonment of their homes and children's stuff raised every red flag for investigators. Finally. So on December 20th, 2019, police publicly announced that JJ and Tylee were missing and in danger. And this press release and subsequent plea for tips generated a huge outpouring of information from the public. And the mysterious case of the Doomsday Mom, as the media dubbed Lori, and her missing kids dominated headlines. And investigators revealed that they believed the children's disappearance was linked to Tammy Daybell's suspicious death. And Chad and Lori, through a lawyer, issued a statement on December 23rd denying wrongdoing and professing their love for their kids, but notably did not produce the children or say where they were. Suspicious. And as the year ended, police were openly criticizing Lori and Chad's lack of cooperation, calling it astonishing and pleading with them to do the right thing. But remember, they're evil pieces of shit. So the search intensified and the FBI became involved. And on January 3rd, 2020, investigators with the FBI's assistance raided Chad Daybell's Salem, Idaho property for the first time, seizing computers, cell phones, journals, and documents as evidence. And on January 7th, Larry and Kay Woodcock flew to Rexburg and held a very emotional press conference, offering $20,000 in reward for any information leading to JJ and Tylee's safe return. And the Woodcocks implored anyone with knowledge to come forward, with Larry famously pleading, quote, "All I want is just to see those children," unquote. And this public appeal kept the pressure on law enforcement and on Chad and Lori, who remained in hiding in Hawaii. So authorities finally pinned down Lori and Chad's location in Kauai, Hawaii. And police in Kauai served Lori on January 25th with a court order from Idaho demanding that she produce JJ and Tylee within 5 days to prove they were alive and well. Why is it 5 days? Why isn't it immediately? These are kids. I don't understand our judicial system. I really don't. But this was essentially a last chance given to Lori. And if it was all a misunderstanding, she could clear it up by simply showing the children. The deadline of January 30th came and went, and Lori failed to present the kids to the authorities. And during this Hawaii period, East Idaho news reporter Nate Eaton dramatically confronted Lori and Chad in a parking lot, asking them point blank,
"Can you tell me where your kids are? Where are your kids?"
No comment.
No comment? They've been missing for 4 months. You have nothing to say? You're over here in Hawaii? Where are your children?
And the clip of Lori smirking and stonewalling went viral. Just evil bitch. Further painting her in the public eye as either delusional or nefarious. But with Lori defying the court order, Idaho authorities prepared to move against her. So Kauai police, acting on an Idaho warrant, arrested Lori Vallow on February 20th. And in early March 2020, Lori was flown back to Rexburg in handcuffs, where crowds and media awaited her arrival. But despite arrests, Lori still refused to disclose the fate or whereabouts of JJ and Tylee. And Chad, who was not immediately arrested, continued to support her. But suspicion was mounting that the children had met a grim end, especially as no verified sightings of them had occurred since September. But still, investigators held out hope that they might find the kids alive as they continued gathering evidence. But as we know, they wouldn't. So during the spring, the case quietly progressed as prosecutors and law enforcement built their case. And they combed through digital data and newly obtained evidence. And in April of 2020, a letter from the Idaho Attorney General became public, revealing that Lori and Chad were now under investigation, not just for desertion, but for conspiracy to commit murder in the case of Charles Vallow, Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell. And this was a strong signal that authorities suspected Chad and Lori of being behind multiple deaths. And meanwhile, Lori remained jailed, unable to post her lowered $1 million bail bond. And Chad had quietly returned to Idaho, yet to be arrested. And the investigation's breakthrough came on June 9th. Acting on new evidence, likely a combination of Alex's cell phone, GPS data, and Chad's odd texts about the raccoon, the FBI, Rexburg Police, and Fremont County Sheriff's Office swarmed Chad Daybell's property with a search warrant. And they focused on areas of interest in the yard identified via technology and previous searches. And within a few hours, investigators made that gruesome discovery. And that was the human remains buried in a shallow grave on Chad's land. So by midday, as this news broke, Chad Daybell attempted to flee. And he got in his SUV and drove off. But officers stopped him about a mile away and took him into custody. And the remains were sent to the lab for identification, and on June 13th, the heart-wrenching confirmation came to the public. And that was that the remains were those of 7-year-old JJ Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. And the way in which they were buried matched the disturbing activities implied by Alex's September phone pings and Chad's texts about shooting a raccoon. And for months, Chad and Lori had lied to everyone as their children's bodies lay hidden in Chad's backyard. But the discovery answered the agonizing question of where the kids were, but raised another, and that was, why? And this was a question that would be addressed in court. And a memorial was later set up on the fence just down the road from Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho, where the remains of Tylee and JJ were recovered. And the memorial's photographs, flowers, and a sign reading "Justice for Tylee and JJ" bore witness to the end of a desperate search and the beginning of a quest for justice. So on June 9th, immediately after the remains were found, police booked Chad Daybell into Fremont County Jail. And for a brief time, both Lori and Chad sat in Idaho's jails, accused but not yet formally charged with murder. But now, with the children's bodies recovered, the case shifted fully into criminal prosecution phase. And the mystery was over, and the task now was to hold those responsible to account. And the heinous nature of these crimes, filicide and spousal murder driven by bizarre cult beliefs, would ensure that the trials to come garnered international attention. So from the outset, the Vallow Daybell case was one fueled and followed by a massive online audience. Both Chad and Lori had notable digital footprints that played into this investigation and public fascination. Chad had an extensive online presence through his doomsday fiction and prepper community activities, and he appeared on podcasts, spoke in YouTube videos from Preparing a People conferences, and moderated forums about end-time prophecies. And through these channels, he reached a wide audience of LDS fringe enthusiasts even before his crimes. And Chad co-hosted a podcast and gave interviews where he calmly discussed his visions of the apocalypse. And these recordings later became key for investigators to understand his mindset and for the public to hear, in his own voice, the extreme beliefs that underpinned the murders. And Lori, allegedly, as her accounts have since been deleted, too, had been active on social media, though in a different way. Because prior to things falling apart, Lori's Facebook and Instagram accounts painted a picture of a fun-loving mom, and she shared smiling photos of Tylee and JJ on family trips and posts about her faith. But after meeting Chad, Lori's social media shifted, and she posted cryptic spiritual messages, and by late 2019, she had gone mostly dark online. But still, digital evidence of their activities was everywhere. And one particularly important aspect was the digital trail of their travels. And when Lori and Chad abruptly left Idaho and flew to Hawaii in late 2019, they left a trail of electronic records. Things like airline bookings, hotel check-ins, and social media snapshots. And remarkably, they appeared almost carefree in Hawaii, seemingly untroubled by the storm building around them. And Lori even made inquiries about renting a place in Hawaii for long term, as if planning a new life, as if the consequences wouldn't catch up with them. All the while, her children were nowhere in sight, and she knew that they were gone. And photos of Lori and Chad in Hawaii surfaced on social media and news sites, enraging the public. Because how could these two relax in paradise while refusing to say where their kids were? So these images and posts became a huge source of pressure. And law enforcement was monitoring their online moves as well. And one could say that Chad and Lori's own social media trail helped incriminate them, as it showed Lori basking in wedding bliss when she claimed her kids were safe elsewhere. And Chad and Lori's online communications provided evidence as well. And investigators subpoenaed their cloud data, finding correspondence between the two where they discussed spiritual justifications for getting rid of obstacles. And they found that Chad had texted Lori love stories in the days after Charles' death. Essentially chapters of a steamy James and Elena romance novel paralleling their affair. And they also found that Lori used Charles' Amazon account to shop for things like a wedding ring, and transactions timestamped while Tammy was still alive. And all these digital breadcrumbs became a crucial part of the evidence that authorities pieced together to reveal the conspiracy. And the online religious community that initially supported Chad and Lori also turned on them as the scandal broke. And websites and forums that had once hosted Chad's writings suddenly disavowed them. Oh no, don't want karma to bite them. But in my opinion, they're just as bad. And podcasts that Lori and Chad appeared on were removed or flooded with comments from horrified listeners once the news of the missing children spread. So while the internet and social platforms helped them gain influence at first, in the end, those same platforms amplified their downfall, spreading awareness and outrage about their crimes at lightning speed. And as the case gained notoriety, thousands of citizen sleuths across the country took to the internet to help unravel the mystery, because this was a true crime saga that played out in real time on social media. And Facebook groups dedicated to finding JJ and Tylee sprang up almost overnight in late 2019. And these groups quickly amassed members who traded theories, shared public documents, and kept the spotlight on the missing kids. So these Facebook communities just became a crowdsourced research hub. And Reddit was another platform buzzing with activity. And a subreddit dedicated to the case featured detailed timelines and analysis compiled by users, some of whom had investigative or legal backgrounds and could provide insight into court procedures and charges. And contributors on Reddit painstakingly pieced together the family tree, explained LDS doctrinal references that popped up, and even crowdsourced a timeline of events. And they debated motives and means, all while keeping the case in the public eye. So every development, from indictments to court hearings to leaked documents, was immediately dissected by thousands of eyes. And nothing Lori or Chad did escaped notice once this internet army mobilized. So this groundswell of online interest had real impacts, and it likely pressured law enforcement and prosecutors to act swiftly and transparently, knowing the public was closely watching. And the social media fervor also meant that potential witnesses or people with information were more likely to come forward. And Lori's friend, Melanie Gibb, who had initially lied for Lori, contacted police in early December of 2019 to admit Lori had asked her to lie about JJ's whereabouts. And Melanie's crucial information about that was a turning point that helped police zero in on Lori's deception. And though not confirmed, it's plausible that seeing the case everywhere and people clamoring for truth gave her the push to do the right thing. But not all citizen sleuthing was helpful. And some internet vigilantes started spreading rumors and misinformation, which is a common pitfall in high-profile cases. And by and large, however, the Facebook and Reddit communities kept their focus on facts, often sharing links to official documents and credible news sources. And the true crime community's mobilization ensured that national media, and thus authorities, couldn't drop the ball on the case. So citizen sleuths had followed Vallow and Daybell as they traveled to Hawaii, sharing updates with their followers and law enforcement, and ultimately helping lead to her arrest, which is insane and awesome. It was very much a 21st century phenomenon. So the successful prosecution of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell hinged heavily on a mountain of digital evidence, because investigators gathered an extraordinary array of electronic data, which, when woven together, created an incontrovertible tapestry of guilt. Because these people were f***ing idiots, thankfully. And cell phone GPS and location data was perhaps the most damning technological evidence. because the FBI Cellular Analysis Survey Team, otherwise known as CAST, pored over Alex Cox's phone records, and these records provided timestamps and GPS coordinates showing exactly where Alex's phone was during critical moments. And Alex's phone placed him in Chad's backyard for 2 hours on the morning of September 9th, as we know, which lined up with the burial of Tylee. And on September 23rd, Alex's phone pinged near Chad's pond for only 17 minutes, correlating with the time frame of JJ's burial. And this kind of hard data was presented in court via detailed maps, which were essentially tech eyewitnesses to the crimes. And without it, Chad and Lori might have continued to claim ignorance about what had happened to the kids. But it's hard to argue with a GPS dot showing your co-conspirator's phone in your yard right when a murder likely occurred. Not to mention, text messages, emails, and even metadata from photos also played a huge role in the case, as investigators recovered a text Chad sent to Tammy on September 9th about burying a raccoon, as we know. And that harmless-sounding message became sinister in context, establishing that Chad was trying to cover up activity on his property. And police also found text exchanges between Lori, Chad, and Alex discussing people by code names or referring to evil spirits. And in one haunting set of messages, Lori and Chad mused about, quote, a perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children, unquote, strongly suggesting premeditation of the murders. And Charles Vallow's old emails, like the ones to Tammy's, and Lori and Chad's texts under aliases were all recovered through search warrants. And these provided direct insight into their plotting and state of mind. And financial records accessed digitally offered more proof of motive, because investigators showed that after Charles' death, Lori immediately attempted to claim his life insurance, only to find the beneficiary had been changed to Kay Woodcock, as mentioned before. Similarly, they documented Chad's rush to increase Tammy's life insurance in September of 2019 to the maximum allowed. And Lori also kept collecting Social Security benefits that were issued for Tylee and JJ from the deaths of Joseph, Ryan, and Charles, respectively, even after the children were dead. You're a disgusting human being. But this just established a financial motive. And beyond religious reasons, they stood to gain money from these deaths. And these digital financial logs painted a picture of greed. And surveillance footage from various locations filled in more blanks. And investigators obtained CCTV video from the self-storage facility in Rexburg where Lori had hastily rented a unit in October of 2019. And the footage showed Lori, Alex, and Chad in various combinations visiting the unit multiple times, dropping off a number of different things including boxes and children's items like bikes and scooters and more. And this indicated Lori was stashing the kids' belongings, perhaps to hide evidence of their absence. And police later found that storage unit untouched, full of JJ and Tylee's keepsakes abandoned. So this whole case, Lori and Chad's case, was very much a 21st century investigation, because without the cell phone records, computer forensics, and online paper trail, this might have remained a circumstantial case. And with them, law enforcement was able to assemble a meticulous chronology and motive for each crime. And if there is a heart in this tragic saga, it is embodied by Kay and Larry Woodcock, the grandparents of little JJ Vallow. And Kay is the biological grandmother of JJ, and she's Charles Vallow's sister. And she and Larry cared for JJ as an infant before Charles and Lori adopted him. And the Woodcocks adored JJ and remained very involved in his life even after adoption. And it was Kay Woodcock's early suspicion that first alerted the world that JJ and Tylee were in danger. And in the months after Charles' July 2019 death, Lori had all but cut off the Woodcocks from contact with JJ, offering one thin excuse after another. But by late summer of 2019, Kay sensed something was amiss. And at first, she thought Lori might be having a breakdown or hiding the kids due to some custody dispute. But as weeks turned into months with only vague updates, Kay's worry deepened. And come fall, Kay began reaching out to authorities in both Arizona and Idaho, reporting that she couldn't reach her grandson. So it was Kay's tenacity that directly led Rexburg police to perform the late November 2019 welfare check that exposed the lies about the children's whereabouts. And when the children's remains were discovered in June 2020, Kay and Larry were absolutely devastated. Yet even in their grief, they stood front and center at press briefings. And while it wasn't the outcome they had hoped, at least now they could lay the kids to rest. And the Woodcocks continued to be pillars of strength during Lori's trial in 2023. And they attended nearly every single hearing. And Kay even took the witness stand to recount how Charles had confided in her before his death that he feared Lori's cult-like ideas. And Larry gave a powerful victim impact statement telling her directly,
I truly wish I was there to look the murderers in the eyes. I'm unable to. I will say this, murderers, you're nothing. You're a murderer. You're a narcissist, psychopath, delusional murderer.
All you need to say. Well said. And the Woodcocks' unwavering fight for truth not only cracked the case open, but kept the memory of JJ and Tylee alive to the public. And then there's Colby Ryan. And Colby Ryan is Lori's eldest child, born from her second marriage, and the older half-brother to Tylee and adoptive brother to JJ. And Colby's role in this tragedy is complex, because he loved his mother, yet ultimately he became a key figure in questioning her and aiding investigators. And initially, when suspicions first arose, Colby defended Lori. Yet Lori had told Colby a variety of lies. At one point, she claimed Tylee was busy at college and that JJ was with his grandparents, and Colby just wanted to believe her. But by late 2019, he grew alarmed, and he realized he hadn't actually spoken to Tylee in a really long time. And the last texts he got from Tylee's phone in the fall were strangely stilted, not in her voice and full of odd excuses. So Colby told police that when he expressed worry in text to Tylee, he got brief replies saying she was safe but busy, which struck him as very unlike his sister. And those messages were likely Lori or someone else impersonating Tylee after she was already dead. And as 2020 began and Lori refused to tell anyone where the kids were, Colby publicly broke his silence. And in media interviews, a distraught Colby pleaded with Lori to do the right thing and tell what happened. And he recorded heart-wrenching YouTube videos addressing his mom, saying she wasn't the same person and begging her to save her children's lives by revealing the truth. And these public statements from Colby were significant, and they undercut Lori's narrative that everything was fine. But Colby would fully cooperate with investigators. And perhaps Colby's most dramatic contribution came in mid-2020, when he agreed to participate in a recorded jailhouse phone call with Lori once she was arrested. And this call was later played for the jury at Lori's trial. And in it, Colby emotionally confronts his mother, demanding she tell him if his siblings are alive. And Lori evades and offers bizarre religious platitudes. At one point, Colby tells her that God will punish her for the things that she has done, and Lori shockingly just laughs on the phone because, she's f***ing evil. And that disturbing audio lets jurors hear Lori's coldness and detachment in her own voice. And Colby telling her, "I don't know a murderous mother," drove home how far into delusion Lori had sunk. But he no longer knew who she was. And it was powerful evidence of Lori's lack of remorse or accountability, just strengthening the prosecution's case that she was the mastermind, not an unwitting dupe of Chad. So by the time of Lori's 2023 trial, Colby was firmly in the role of survivor advocate, and he took to the stand as a witness for the state, introducing the family to the jury and describing the love he had for Tylee and JJ, painting a human picture of the victims beyond the grisly details. And he recounted how Lori had been loving mom when he was younger, but how around 2018 he saw a radical change as she got into Chad's teachings. And his testimony about Lori's personality shift and the way she'd start talking about zombies and evil spirits just set the stage for understanding the motive. And he expressed grief and also anger, saying that Tylee and JJ deserved so much better. And in the end, Colby, having lost his entire family, stood as a figure of resilience. And his willingness to confront his mother and cooperate with the law enforcement was crucial in achieving justice for his siblings, showing even for within Lori's family, there were those who would hold her accountable. So Lori was initially charged for 2 counts of felony child desertion for willfully abandoning Tylee and JJ, and misdemeanors for obstruction, lying to police, solicitation, and contempt of court. And at her extradition hearing in Hawaii, Lori notably appeared unmoved. and she ultimately waived extradition and was flown back to Idaho on March 5th, 2020, under armed guard. And in her initial Idaho court appearance, the judge reduced bail from $5 million to $1 million after the defense emphasized Lori's low flight risk as she was prominent in the public eye. But unable to post bond, as we know, Lori remained in jail. And importantly, at this point, she was not yet charged with murder or conspiracy to murder, as the authorities were still assembling that case. Chad would be booked on 2 felony counts of concealment of evidence and or destruction of evidence for hiding the bodies of Tylee and JJ. And in his first court appearance, Chad's bail was also set to $1 million, with both Lori and Chad behind bars by mid-2020. And prosecutors moved methodically to upgrade charges as new evidence came in and grand juries convened. And initially, Lori and Chad faced a somewhat convoluted list of charges. Lori had child desertion, obstruction, and related counts, while Chad had evidence concealment. And over the summer of 2020, additional charges were tacked on. And in June, Lori was also charged with conspiracy to conceal evidence once it was clear she and Chad acted together. So everyone anticipated more serious charges pending the completion of Tammy's autopsy and further investigation. And in early 2021, authorities in Fremont County, where Tammy died, and Madison County, where the kids were killed, coordinated to present the case to a grand jury. So on May 24th, 2021, an Idaho grand jury indicted Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell on multiple counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and finally directly accusing them of killing 17-year-old Tylee and 7-year-old JJ, and 49-year-old Tammy Daybell. And this was a sweeping indictment covering all 3 murders, as well as related charges of insurance fraud for Chad collecting Tammy's life insurance, and grand theft for Lori continuing to draw Social Security benefits on the kids after their deaths. And at a press conference on May 25th, prosecutors made the stunning announcement public, outlining how Lori, Chad, and Alex Cox, now deceased, conspired in a plot driven by radical beliefs and greed. Essentially, they allege that Lori and Chad used their cult-like religious teachings to justify murdering Lori's children and Chad's wife, in part to remove obstacles to their relationship and also to collect financial benefits. And Lori, still in jail, and Chad, who by then had also remained incarcerated, both had initial court appearances on these new charges and pleaded not guilty, believe it or not. Almost like they're narcissistic psychopathic assholes or something. And in Idaho, these murder charges made them eligible for the death penalty, which the state quickly signaled it would pursue, at least for Chad. However, shortly after the indictment, there was a pause in proceedings for Lori. And in June 2021, Lori Vallow was declared incompetent to stand trial by a psychological evaluator. And the judge agreed that Lori was not currently able to assist in her own defense, so on June 8th, 2021, she was committed to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare for restorative treatment. And the details of her mental condition weren't made public, but it was reported that she might have been diagnosed with a depressive or delusional disorder, and this commitment meant a delay until she could be deemed fit, essentially hitting pause on Lori's case. But Chad's case, meanwhile, proceeded on track, and his attorneys entered not guilty pleas on his behalf on all counts and started the long process of pretrial motions. And for about 10 months, Lori underwent treatment, and by April 11th, 2022, the court found Lori Vallow competent to stand trial. Almost like she was stalling or something, because she's evil or something. And she was returned to the county jail to face her charges. And at her arraignment on April 19th, 2022, Lori refused to enter a plea, standing mute. So the judge entered a not guilty plea for her on all counts. Now, with both defendants on the same page legally, the case moved toward a joint trial until another twist separated them again. And prosecutors initially planned to try Lori and Chad together in one big trial, giving the overlapping evidence. And they even announced in mid-2022 that they would seek the death penalty for Lori as well, just as they would for Chad. However, Chad's team wanted more time to prepare, given that they had nothing to go on because he's guilty. And Chad waived his right to a speedy trial, while Lori asserted hers. So this led Chad's lawyer to successfully argue in late 2022 that the cases should be severed, and Chad's trial would be postponed and Lori's would proceed 1st in 2023. Additionally, just weeks before Lori's trial in 2023, the judge removed the death penalty as a possibility for her, citing that her defense didn't have adequate time to review some late arriving DNA evidence if a death sentence was on the table. So Lori would be tried for her life, but with a maximum penalty of life imprisonment rather than execution. So the decision to hold separate trials meant that Lori Vallow Daybell went before a jury in 2023, and Chad Daybell would follow with his in 2024. And each trial was its own media spectacle, revealing the disturbing details to the entire world. But Lori's trial commenced in early April of 2023 in Boise, Idaho. The prosecution painted Lori as a woman driven by money, power, and and who used her doomsday cult beliefs to manipulate those around her into removing any obstacle to what she wanted. And over the course of 4 weeks, the state called roughly 60 witnesses, and jurors heard heart-wrenching testimony from law enforcement describing the condition of Tylee and JJ's remains, and they saw photos of the Pet Cemetery burn pit where Tylee's bones had been reduced to nothing. And the graphic nature of this evidence was such that Lori at one point asked to be excused from the courtroom when photos were shown. And that request was luckily denied by the judge because she should have to look at what she did to her children. And perhaps most damning was Lori's own recorded jail call that we talked about before with Colby, where her indifferent attitude and bizarre laughter at being accused of murder likely made a poor impression on the jury. And Lori's defense, notably, called no witness of their own, because they didn't have any. She's an evil person. But their whole defense was that Chad Daybell had a dark influence on Lori, but this would fall flat, because she's an adult woman who can make her own decisions. And on May 12th, 2023, the jury found Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on all counts, including the murders of Tylee and JJ and conspiracy in Tammy's murder, plus grand theft. And the evidence of her active participation and leadership in the conspiracy was overwhelming. And Lori showed little reaction as the verdict was read. And in late July 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, receiving 5 separate life sentences, 3 to be served consecutively for the murders and 2 concurrently for conspiracy. And at her sentencing, Judge Stephen Boise admonished her in scathing terms, saying, quote, "You chose the most evil and destructive path possible," unquote. And he said, describing how she justified the killings by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole. And Lori, in a rambling statement, still professed her innocence and said bizarrely that her children were happy in heaven and no one was actually murdered. And remarks that only reinforced the perception that she remains deeply delusional or in denial. Quote, "Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Happen. Fatal side effects from medications happen," unquote. Just batshit, man. But following her Idaho conviction, Lori was extradited to Arizona to finally face charges for Charles' murder and the attempt on Brandon Berdrew, where she would eventually also be found guilty of both in 2025, adding additional life sentences. And she was found guilty for conspiring to murder Charles on April 22nd and for conspiring to murder Brandon on June 12th. And she was given 2 additional life sentences on July 25th. And then there was Chad. And Chad Daybell's trial took place about a year after Lori's, in April and May of 2024, also in Boise due to the change of venue. And Chad, unlike Lori, had the death penalty on the table, which raised the stakes significantly. And his defense strategy diverged from Lori's, and they squarely pinned most of the blame on Lori and Alex. And in opening statements, Chad's lawyer painted him as a misguided religious man who was seduced and controlled by Lori, arguing that Lori was the mastermind and that Chad was guilty perhaps of being foolish, but not murder. What? Not murder, even though there's like 1,000 pieces of evidence. The prosecution, by contrast, portrayed Chad as equally culpable and driven by base motives and emphasizing the insurance money he gained from Tammy's death. And many witnesses and much of the evidence was similar to Lori's trial, given the overlap. And one new element in Chad's trial, though, was the focus on Tammy's murder. And jurors heard from Chad and Tammy's children, Emma and Garth, about how their mother's health had gotten worse near her death. However, jurors also heard from Tammy's family and friends about how shocked they were at her sudden death, considering how healthy she had seemed leading up to it, reinforcing the homicide finding. And they also heard of Chad's behavior after Tammy's death, like moving in with Lori and their marriage days after, which undercut any notion of him as a passive pawn. So on May 30th of 2024, after deliberation, the jury found Chad Daybell guilty on all counts as well, and the first-degree murders of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, plus conspiracy and insurance fraud. So having seen the same mountain of evidence, they did not buy the idea that Chad was just Lori's victim. And the trial then proceeded to a penalty phase because the death penalty was sought. And on June 1st, 2024, the judge formally sentenced Chad Daybell to death for the 3 murders, plus additional years for the other charges. And Chad reportedly showed little emotion as the sentence was handed down because he's a narcissistic psychopath, evil monster, and he was transferred to the Idaho Maximum Security Institution and placed on death row where he belongs. And Idaho hadn't actually conducted an execution in many years, but Chad's sentence sent a strong message given the heinousness of his crimes. And as of 2025, Chad is appealing his conviction and sentence to Idaho Supreme Court, a process that could take years. But in the meantime, he remains behind bars, destined to live out his days in the shadow of the crimes he once thought were divinely sanctioned. And I say, good riddance. And these people deserve to rot. Rot and think about all the things they have done wrong. So, that is that for this case. A heart-wrenching case. My heart goes out to the victims' families and to the children and to the spouses. It's just horrible. Horrible. But please let me know what other cases you want me to deep dive into. I always read the comments. And until I see you next time, stay safe.